We're ready? Okay. Welcome to the Wednesday, March 15th, 2023 Garrison Board of Education regular business meeting and budget presentation. Dusty, will you call the roll for us, please?
Jocelyn Epicello. Here. David Gelber.
Here.
Madeline Julian.
She will be here in a few minutes.
Courtney McCarthy. Here. Kent Schott.
Here.
Matthew Spicer.
Excused.
Sarah Tormey.
Here. Okay, Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, do I have any agenda changes proposed this evening from board members? No? Okay. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby accept the agenda as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays? Abstentions? Okay. We're going to move on to the board communications and presentations part of the agenda. This evening, we are going to begin with our second budget presentation. This is a budget forum. So at this one, we are going to have Carl and Joe present the budget. Then we'll have time for the board to ask questions at the end. And then once the board has asked their questions, we're going to open it up to the public to come to the microphone and ask any questions they may have as well. This will be a little bit more informal than our last budget presentations because it is a budget forum, so we will be able to engage a little bit more. We also have a, this will be in the presentation as well, but mark your calendars, a budget forum, or budget presentation for the community and a walkthrough of the building on Saturday, is it the 24th? 25th, excuse me, on Saturday the 25th. And that again will be a more informal opportunity for the community to ask questions. All right, Carl and Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, as we've done in the past, I will begin, just kind of frame the goals and the objectives of the budget, talk a little bit about staffing and program, and then I will turn it over to Joe for the financial piece. So to start with, I'll move quickly over the topics I covered last time, but we had a few basic goals. One of the first was to stay within the allowable tax levy. This year, we are allowed to go up to 3.3%. Joe will explain more about why it is higher than 2%, but that is the allowable. It only needs a simple majority. But being that we did an override last year, I think the Finance Committee and the entire board felt very strongly about staying within the tax cap. Transparency is always a goal. It's important. We had a very high level of community engagement last year, and we appreciate that. It seems like it will continue going forward, and we appreciate our community staying involved and all the feedback that you give us. Also, maintaining budget lines that are based on very accurate projections. We do an awful lot of analysis starting in December, actually, and into January, February, looking at our needs, currently our programs, and what we expect for next school year. We talk to every department, all of our staff, to determine what those needs will be. So the lines, although there is some contingency, and these are projections for a school year that has yet to begin, so it's 5 months away, 6 months away, but we do our best to be accurate with that. Also, we had a goal to maintain staffing levels and programs that support our district's goals and initiatives. Moving on to the instructional programs, you've seen this many times, but we always are thinking about our vision of the graduate, all of our dispositions and attributes that we want our students to leave Garrison with after 8th grade, more specific plans and areas that we continue to work in. And here are a few major initiatives. Of course, this is not an all-inclusive list, but some of the new and exciting things that the budget will support And let me emphasize that you don't see dollar amounts next to each one because a lot of these are really human resources that are moving forward with these initiatives. In some cases, there's some outside consultants involved that do come at a price. However, most of this work, or the vast majority of the work, is happening with our internal existing staff. But one major goal is we've already started to pursue a Green Ribbon Award. This is a national award that schools can receive for making significant progress and accomplishments in three main areas: reducing environmental impact. Good example of that is our capital project, getting away from fossil fuel for heating and air conditioning, as well as our hot water heaters and lighting that is efficient, and many other things. I won't go down the entire list. Health and wellness, your health instruction, other things that you're doing to encourage nutrition and physical education all fall in that category. And then environmental ed is the third pillar. And we've made an investment here, and I think it's really starting to pay off, but we do have a staff member who is leading environmental ed in Garrison, teaching at every grade level. We're really strong in this area, looking at the criteria for the award. And of course, we're going to have a culminating climate summit as we did last year, but this year we're even adding more to that event. We're partnering with Desmond Fish. This is a former library, as most of you know. Now we are referring to it as the Learning Commons, but we still feel very strongly about having books in students' hands, particularly at the early grade levels, but really all the way through. You can read online, yes, but books are still very important for us, and we are in the process of setting up more books and cooperating with Desmond Fish, where we'll have rotating collections and students will actually be able to check out books here that belong to Desmond Fish. So we're looking forward to that partnership next year. Seal of Civic Readiness is happening with our 8th grade social studies department. Mr. Yap is also working on that. Along with Ms. Arbor, I believe, is also contributing to this, but it's preparing our students for high school and beyond. It's a new initiative, and each one, it's project-based, and it's something that we're launching this school year, and it'll continue in years ahead. Also, all of our special area classes, art, debate, STEAM, theater, band, chorus, e-music, some of these only came about in the last few years, but they're going well, and the budget does support maintaining all of them. Band and chorus, we do start with our younger students. This is optional for them, those who choose to play an instrument or sing. The Yale Ruler program has been with us for quite some time. It's an evidence-based program. We have a partnership with BOCES. It's a nominal fee, but we receive training and materials and resources. We will continue with that. DBT is also a program that we use. It started with our special education department and supporting students with special needs, but it's broadened as we trained staff and built capacity. We find special ed and gen ed students are benefiting from this work in that area. DEI, there's a lot of good stuff happening, and I won't go into all the details, but there's a lot of PD and building work that will continue, and it's supported by the budget. And finally, technology infrastructure upgrades. There are things we need to do. This project implemented enhanced security systems, keyless entry. We have a camera system. We have a new heating and air conditioning system that is completely dependent on our network. So we do need to do some infrastructure upgrades to make sure that all of that stays functional and there's no disruption. Moving on to class sizes, this I'll run through quickly, but we project 15 students for pre-K next year, and we're very excited about that. This was the first year that we had a pre-K program in Garrison. There is state funding for this program. And it is basically the students are thriving, so much so that we actually are planning to extend the hours. They started with a reduced day, but we do think they can handle a full day, and an announcement will go out shortly. In kindergarten, we're projecting 19 students. This is always a little tricky. We do sometimes get added enrollment over the summer. I think there's 15 registered now, and based on past trends, we do expect to pick up some more over the next, several months. First grade, we're very confident we will maintain 2 sections because right now we have 32 students. Of course, it could go up, but that's too many students for one class, particularly at a primary grade level. So 2 classes of 16, but second grade we'll have 1 class of 20. Third grade, 1 section of 25. Fourth grade, 1 section of 19. Fifth grade, 1 section of 21 next year. In middle school, 6th grade, 1 section of 21. 7th grade, 1 section of 26. And 8th grade, 1 section of 24. However, I will point out that for mathematics, we do have an accelerated track. Starts in 7th grade and in 8th grade culminates with the Algebra Regions course. So there will be 2 sections of math in 7th and 8th. But otherwise, students will be in 1 section. High school enrollment, we thought it was important to remind the public that we do have some headwinds as far as high school enrollment increasing, and that will cost us more in future years. You see a very small increase from this year to next year, but you see the 2 following years, there's a pretty significant increase. We're fortunate that we've negotiated contracts that are predictable and only will go up as much as 2%, but the enrollment we do expect to increase before it starts leveling off and dropping. Overall staffing remains the same. There is one change, and I'll explain more, but basically it's the same level of staffing, but one position we're reducing by 0.4 or 40%, which is doable without affecting program. Aides, same. Administrators, same. Clerical, same. And facilities. I will point out, though, in the past 2 years, we have reduced quite a bit of staffing, basically 9%. And at this point, I would describe the district as being very lean and efficient with its levels of staffing. To elaborate more on that 0.4 decrease in staffing, Art, basically, to explain this, 2 years ago, the district, during the pandemic, maintained very small class sizes. So basically, K through 8 was in 2 sections. In some cases, you had 11 or 12 children in a class, but that was required. If you recall, there were social distancing requirements to be in-person school. And actually, before the pandemic, Garrison did maintain for many years small class sizes of 12, 13. That was not unusual. After the pandemic, and as we started to face some budget challenges, we did decide to start combining many of those sections. So as I pointed out earlier, every grade level is in 1 section with the exception of grade 1 next year. So as those sections combined, as children travel to special areas, whether it be phys ed or art or music, they go in 1 section as opposed to 2. So the need for additional art teaching periods is no longer needed. So that position can be reduced by 40%, and also maintain all the same level and the same frequency of art classes throughout the district. Another change is with our CSE, CPSE chairperson. For many years, we've used an outside person to chair meetings, and it has worked for us, but we now have hired a psychologist who has extensive background chairing not only 504, but CSE meetings, and looking at the caseload that he is currently managing, and managing really well according to his references, we believe without question he could manage all of our counseling needs, as well as chairing roughly 40 meetings annually for CSE and CPSE. So therefore, we will no longer use the outside CSE chair. Getting a little deeper into the class sections for specials, we added some slides here because a few parents did inquire about this. So at the elementary level, all children, pre-K through grade 5 in a 6-day cycle. We operate in a 6-day cycle, receive 2 art periods per 6-day cycle this year, and that will be the same next year. Music, 1 period per 6-day cycle, and 1 next year. Phys ed, they get 2 classes per 6-day cycle, 2 next year, and theater is 1. And when the students are out at these specials, that's when teachers have their prep period, and all of our elementary staff, by contract, get 1 preparation period per day. Middle school is a little more complicated because it's departmentalized, but basically, our special area classes at the middle school for grades 6, 7, and 8 are debate, STEAM, and theater, and art. They all operate on a 10-week rotation, so by quarter. Additionally, art students receive art once per 6-day cycle throughout the school year. So they're getting everything over a 10-week period. There's a bit of extra art there. What we have this year will be in place for next year. It's identical. Music, at the middle school level, children have a choice. That's part of middle school philosophy, is giving them a choice, and those who would like to play an instrument can be in our band. If you want to sing, you can participate in chorus, and if you do not want to perform, we have the option of e-music, which we started just last year, and that is going well. Phys ed, our students receive 3 phys ed periods in a 6-day cycle, and health, 1 in a 6-day cycle all year. Now, health this year, it is with 7th and 8th grade only. Next year, a minor change is that we're offering health for 6th, 7th, and 8th. You may say, what do we have in lieu of health this year? There was an SEL course that was offered at the beginning of the year, kind of like a transition support, moving from elementary to middle. And then this year, the 6th graders are getting 1 extra period per cycle of Spanish. To elaborate a bit more on the psychologist CSE chair position, and I added this slide because, again, there were some inquiries and some concern about how this could work. So just to elaborate, a chairperson roughly will do 40 annual reviews or program reviews per year. A meeting takes roughly 60 to 90 minutes. But to even go a bit deeper, the chairperson is really a facilitator. And it's a big responsibility. I'm not minimizing it. But really at the CSE table, everyone contributes. Speech therapists, special education teachers, the psychologists, the teachers present ed evals, other service providers, OTs, PTs. So it truly is a collaborative effort. And we do believe, again, with experience, the person that is stepping into the position will be able to handle this. It'll be a busy spring. That's typically when annual reviews occur, March, April, May, and even a few in June. But we're very confident, and we've had extensive conversations with the incoming psychologist about this caseload. Also planning IEPs. Psychologist is a major part of IEP. Recommendations and decision making. You got me there. Also conducting psycho ed evals. If you have roughly, Garrison has maybe 25 children with IEPs, but they get evaluated every 3 years. It's not every year. So on an average, the psychologist would probably perform about 8 or 9 psych evals per year. And again, we think that's really manageable. I think he's doing 40 or 50 in his current position, so it is a fraction of that. Behavior assessments, that usually involves going in, observing in classroom settings, collecting data from other staff members, and also providing individual and group counseling. We offer both IEP mandated counseling as well as non-mandated counseling. Currently, we have a person who is with us temporarily who is managing all of that in 2 days per week. So now for the financial side of it, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joe Jimick.
Thank you, Carl. So we do have some challenges as it comes to expenses and also revenues and we'll get into that. So some of the items that are year-over-year increases, we have debt service for the capital project. As you may know, the district has had to borrow money in order to do the capital project. The borrowing was in short-term bond anticipation notes, but that's been converted to a bond. And the debt service payment of principal and interest next year is $119,000 more than the current year. And that's going to remain at that level for probably the next 10 years or so. Employee health insurance increased by 5.53% in terms of the premium. And if you looked at it on the basis of last year's premiums or the current year's premiums, that is an increase year over year of $75,000. We have increased electric costs to operate the new HVAC system. That's an increase of $69,000 for electric. There's a couple of items that go along with that. One is obviously, as you know, paying your electric bills, the cost of the supply of electric has significantly increased. And then the other thing that goes along with it is when you remodel a school and you remodel the HVAC system, you have to come up to the amount of air requirements that are required by the current code. So we heat and cool, which is another thing. We've added cooling. We didn't have cooling everywhere. Now we have cooling everywhere in the building. And we also have to heat and cool more air. So there's a lot more electric use. And then transportation, we are estimating a CPI of 8% for budgeting purposes because year to year the transportation contracts can be increased by the CPI amount. And just those items together is $325,000. So, yeah. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit just the electricity costs as well in the context of changing from oil to electricity and the expectations we had there when we did that? I mean, I guess some of it probably comes down to the cooling as well and the increase in electricity, but just that would be an obvious question.
Yeah, so I would say the main components of the increase in costs is essentially the doubling of the rate for generation. There was a consortium through the community power that went bankrupt. We were able to lock in a price for the future that started in February, and it goes for 24 months, and that's 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which obviously is significantly more than what was under the consortium, but that is significantly under what the current rates are, which is close to 20. So that's a big component, and so each classroom space also has a amount of air that's required based upon the square footage and the number of occupants that are in the space, and those fresh air requirements. And those requirements are significantly different than when the school was built. So one of the things that you'll find is you have, in each one of the classrooms, there is outside air that's controlled by an electronic damper, and typically you're getting between 20 and 30% outside air. So there's a significant amount of outside air that comes in, and so that outside air comes in, more air is exhausted, you're heating and cooling a lot of air. So that's a big component of the thing, those two things. So it's the price as well as the amount of air. And we are cooling in every space, which we didn't have cooling but for a few spaces before. So there's a lot of capacity that was added. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
To that. Are we expecting savings in the future, next year or the following, now that the fuel cost will eventually come down? I understand that we added AC, and we didn't have AC before, especially in the middle school, so that's going to be an add overall, but are we expecting a reduction in the next year or two?
No. No. We're not, based upon the amount of air that has to be heated and cooled, no. Okay, the transportation, you can see there, this is an adjustment from the previous presentation. You have in 22, 23, and 23, 24, those numbers are essentially the same, but the increase in the transportation expense is offset by the cost of reducing one large bus. So we'll get into what that all means as we get further into the slides. So one of the things that is important, and it's a part of the budget, is we have a number of items in the school that support computers as well as health and safety equipment. So we have 3 network switches that are in the building that are past their design life. They're several years past their design life, and what that means typically is if they would break, we're not able to get support for those units to replace them. So it's a scramble, and those units support the telephones, the door locks, the cameras, the public address system, and HVAC in the oldest portion of the building. So it's that supports the management offices as well as all of the classrooms in the elementary wing. So those devices are at risk, and we need to replace those items. And I think it's important also to mention that we are currently being audited by the state comptroller. This happens every 5 to 7 years. Every school district has to be audited by the comptroller. They started in December, and they have finished their risk assessment, which is basically an overall view of the whole school district, and they've decided to focus on IT for the audit that's coming up. And I think that they did that in recognition of the fact that IT systems protect the funds that are entrusted to the school district. They protect the people and the data that's associated with the people, both the staff and the students. So our IT system is critical for those things, as well as being able to use the phones and being able to talk to the classrooms with the PA system, the door locks, all those things. And our heating system is now controlled. As if your power went off today at your house, the power went off here, and we had to reset a lot of computer things, including the HVAC, in order for it to keep running. So everything depends on computers to ensure the safety and health of the students and staff here. Go ahead.
We're able to butt in as you're going, sorry. So it seems like a lot of these upgrades to me are related to the new work that's been done because of the capital project. And if so, then can any contingency budget or the capital project already voted on budget help cover whatever this fee is? And also, what is this amount roughly for the IT?
Okay, so it is the project. When you go out to vote for a project, you essentially have to tell the public what is included in the authorization. Because these items were not included in the authorization, it's difficult to necessarily extend the capital project to cover these under the umbrella. And the other thing that goes along with that is we have a number of issues as it relates to the HVAC system, a general contract, that are of concern, in terms of completion of the contract. So I think we do not have the contingency money to spare if there's additional things that need to be added in order to ensure that the building is warm enough when it's really cold outside in the winter and things of that nature. So there's a number of items still that are outstanding that haven't met the criteria that we believe are, we need to meet, that are part of the capital project that we don't have money to risk, even if it was available. So that's kind of where we are at the moment there.
The question of using the contingency, and does this fit the scope up to council? However, if you have more specific questions that you would like me to run up to council and ask them, specifically the council or legal counsel that is handling the capital project, please let me know and we can get a more detailed look at exactly where those lines are. Just send them over. So, sorry to interrupt you.
There are several grants specific to technology. There are several grants out there specific to technology upgrade for schools. Can you discuss that and to see if we can use or apply for some of those grants to cover this?
Sure. So there are a number of items that are related towards technology. A lot of the items, such as the Smart Schools Bond Act and some others, have already been used. Our allotment for Smart Schools Bond Act was used in prior years to support purchase of display boards. So there's certain allotments for those, and those have been exhausted. Our Title IV allocation is only is $10,000, and it's on an annual basis, and we have items that are set aside for that. We are with the items that are in the budget, we have applied for E-rate funding, which is federal funding or federal matching funding to pay for technology devices, whether this is, I believe it's considered a Category 2 device, which is hardware. So we are applying for that, which offsets the cost, but we have to budget for the full amount because you get the money in the following year. So we budget for the full freight of those items. And then the other thing that goes along with this is these are being purchased through BOCES COSERs. So we will get BOCES aid in the following year based upon these purchases, and are relatively like our 30% reimbursement rate for BOCES aid. So we are applying for federal money as well as state money for these items. So, I think we're doing what we can in order to be able to procure those. And I think there was another question there, was how much of this is hardware? It's about $25,000 in fixed hardware and $30,000+ in installation and cabling costs. So one of the things that we have that we're correcting, a part of next year's budget, is these three network switches are daisy chained together, which means they're point-to-point wired together. So if we lose one, we lose all of them, which is a risk, obviously. So if we lose one network switch, we lose this whole side of the building. Essentially doesn't have these items that are listed there. The telephones don't work, the doors, locks, the cameras, they don't work on this side. Go ahead.
Seeing as we're talking about this, and you mentioned the comptroller's audit.
Yes.
I know they haven't really established a timeline yet, but do we anticipate we will have some of the report so that we know if we're able to address some of the items in it, in terms of specifically anything they see an issue with in our network for next year? Do we think we'll get that report in time?
I think what's going to happen is they will be communicating with us as they go along. So if there's issues that they raise, we can start working on those issues right away. But I would anticipate the report probably won't be issued till September kind of time frame. Since it took from December until maybe last week to decide on what they were going to focus on, I think it's going to be several months of, a couple months at least of field work, and then it's going to be their internal processes to generate the report. They're going to meet with us and obviously discuss anything that they find, as far as risks, confidentially, and then the public facing report, has has the level of detail that's appropriate for the public.
Thank you.
Okay, one of the things that we always want to mention is a lot of our work is based upon the tax cap. The tax cap basically went into place in 2012, and the formula for the tax cap includes a allowable growth factor of 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. And up until the pandemic, let's say, that worked basically in that the rate of inflation was very similar to what was under the cap. But as you can see now, that doesn't work. And since the district depends very heavily on the taxpayers, this is the main source of revenue. So we have an issue as far as the ability to grow revenue versus what the tax cap will allow against the inflation. And if we have bills to pay for the school district, just like you have bills at your own homes, and you all know that there's a number of items that you're paying significantly for this year than you were last year or even 6 months ago. And we are still limited by 2% of the rate of inflation, whichever is less. So on the revenue side, Garrison is expected to be held again to the minimum foundation aid increase of 3%, which is $17,000. Most districts, the median amount of increase this year in Putnam County is 23%, and then the increase in total in the county is $16 million divided amongst the school districts. And if we look at kind of a historical, so last year, all of the districts in Putnam County, with the exception of Garrison, received significant increases in foundation aid. And that's the same that's projected for next year. And if you look at it from a basis over the 2 years, you can see that there are significant increases in aid everywhere else but Garrison. So there's, I think the story in general is, in statewide, is a lot of districts are getting a lot more aid. And the governor is basically fully funding the foundation aid formula. So there's not a lot of pressure from most school districts to be asking for funds. Because that number there for Brewster of close to $8 million means that they're going to continue to get $8 million more than they did 2 years ago for the foreseeable future. So that's obviously a big increase. But I think part of the reason why the foundation aid formula is the way it is and why we're held to the 3% minimum is because of this. So the other school districts within Putnam County, the taxpayers in those school districts pay significantly more per dollar of full value of their property than Garrison does. So you can see there's with each town that's in each school district, it has the full value tax rate per thousand, and the tops out there are $26 per thousand, and it goes down in decreasing order. And Garrison is $9.75 per thousand. So the median is 2.3 times the amount of taxes per thousand than what Garrison pays. And so including even the override last year, the median is significantly higher than what the Garrison residents pay. And if you look at it in a more in a larger area, No, I think we probably just,
Oh, we have to do the waving.
yeah. Yep. So, so there are 88 school districts that have a portion of Dutchess, Putnam, Orange, Rockland, or Westchester County. And in that larger area, the median is 2.13 times the Garrison tax rate. Garrison is ranked 87 out of 88 in terms of the rate, and only Pecanico is lower at $9.25 per thousand. And you know, the key components of the foundation aid formula are adjusted gross income and property values and the relative need of the students. So how many kids are eligible for free and reduced lunch, how many kids have English as a new language, how many kids have high special education needs. And all those things point to that Garrison is not a needy school district. And then when you look at it statewide, there's 678 districts listed in New York State. And what I did is I took all 678 and put them in rank order. And Garrison is ranked 616th out of 678 for the tax rate. So then you can see some of our neighbors there and where they fit in terms of tax rate in the state. So Garrison rates are lower than 90% of the school districts in the state. They're ranked 616 out of 678. And then we have two questions there. Is it reasonable to expect the same educational program at Garrison at less than half the tax rate of our neighbors? So, you know, I don't know if that is reasonable. I think that is subject to some discussion. And then this budget is being built using fund balance. So one of the things we have to mention is once that fund balance is depleted, how can we sustain what we're doing? And we'll get into that. But I think that's important to kind of keep that in mind. We are building this budget using a significant portion of our available fund balance that we access. We won't have that choice next year, so you know, there's tough decisions ahead.
Before you move on,
Yep.
I mean, those are two good questions. I would say the second question, it can't be sustained unless it seems like we pay more than 975.
Correct.
So what are the mechanisms for paying more than 975?
The main mechanism for paying more than 975 or more than what the formula is in place is an override.
That's the only way, is an override. Like,
Yeah.
you can't go to the assessor and say, can you assess the values?
No, because what happens is if you change the assessments, it just splits up the levy amount. The levy amount is what the board proposes and the public authorizes, and any changes to the assessments just move.
Move the money around.
Yeah,
So it
just change
balances
the size of the slices. The pie is still the same.
Right.
So the pie, the overall pie amount is what gets decided by the board and voted on by the public. If it's above, for us this year, the 3.29%, it requires an override. That is really the only way in order to maintain the same level of a program that we're going to need to do in the future.
Well,
you.
while we're paused here, I'll say that, you know, when we talk about our neighbors, you pointed to Pecanico Hills, which is the other K-8 district located in Westchester County. If you go back and read their audit reports, I haven't seen their budget presentation for this year, but based on their last audit that I was able to find and read, their tax levy is at about $25 million. Their overall budget is closer to $30 million. And they're sitting on about $30 million in reserves right now. They have approximately according to state ed, I think 276 students. So not that many more than us. That does not include, I believe, their high school population, which is tuitioned out. Similar to when you look on New York SED, you don't see our high school population tuitioned out. But just to keep those numbers in mind, we're doing a tax levy about 10 million right now, trying to match that educational experience.
Well, so could we say that, so we're at 975, we know Haldane, our actual town mate, is at 17.6 or something. If Garrison were to pay 17, what kind of revenue could we collect through property tax?
Well, you would collect double what
Like
you're
almost,
collecting now.
almost double. So we wouldn't even need that unless we really wanted to expand our programming to be really amazing and, because right now what we need is, 12 something, and if we could, it'd be great to get 13 something so we don't have to deplete our fund. So if we just increased that 975 a few percentage points, we wouldn't have to cut anything and we could not deplete our fund balance.
But to be clear, Jocelyn, you can't just do that. You have to do that over 10 years. You'd have to do an override every year for,
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right,
so-
definitely.
A little bit at a time.
you can only do some, like you'd have to do massive overrides to do it a little bit at a time.
I also
right?
think you need to be careful because every year the needs of the school do change, especially when we're running close budgets. We are working on projections, but for example, how many special ed students do we have placed out of district? As those costs fluctuate, that has a great impact on our budget. So even if we're trying to say what we need now is what we need now, maybe 2 years from now, we may need significantly more, depending on what our student body requires.
Well, I think the numbers over time suggest that every year our school needs more, generally. I don't know the historical data for the past 20 years.
I
say,
think
of
we're seeing a
Garrison.
lot more kids in high school right now. Less kids are choosing private school, for example. So that's one of the things we're seeing. And if you go back and watch budget presentations from 4 or 5 years ago, this was projected.
I know, I remember.
Because, yeah, they knew this was coming, that as more kids go to high school, and we deplete our fund balances. We've been building budgets on fund balance for years.
I know. And next year, we're going to have
And we won't be able to.
$160,000 more in high school tuition, based on the numbers of the projected number of increase in students. So that's another 2%, 1.5%, so to say, of tax that we're going to need next year.
I think it's important to keep having that conversation while this, and we'll get back to it. You're doing a great job. We'll get back to it, and sorry to keep interrupting, but that next year's going to be really tough. We're holding.
This year a little tough and next year a little tough?
I have.
This is for everybody, obviously.
Yeah,
not just
not-
you, Sarah.
Because
Sorry.
it doesn't come without risk. If we don't pass an override budget, then we go to contingency and we lose. Basically, you have to gamble to do that. And,
last year
and what
we
we
did.
saw, what we saw last year is a very risky, difficult year on our faculty. We lost faculty, we lost administrators, we had people crying in the parking lot. It's people's lives. So
I know, but we're cutting people this year. We're going to cut even more next year.
we're not cutting people this year.
Well, we're cutting
We're reducing.
a part of
We're
a person.
reducing part of a person. I mean, we are playing with very tight numbers,
But
but
next year's going to be tighter. I just feel like next year is sure cuts to people. I don't know if you want to just make people
I
bite
think-
their nails for a whole year instead of like chipping away right now, like a little bit. So because I can only imagine that we're attracting people here, whether it's families or faculty.
it's about risk tolerance, and it's about gambling, and it's about whether this community, whether we all have the stomach to say, we're going to go for broke. But if we lose all of our specials, we lose all of these things that make this school special, or we can keep trying to build with what we have. I don't have the tolerance for that, certainly this year, to do that. I went through that last year. I saw what it did to our community, what it did to our school. I don't think that's worth the risk this year. We figured out a program that we think we can get through this year. It's just, that's my personal opinion. I just don't think the community is ready to step up and do that again. And it wasn't.
They demonstrated that they were ready last year.
I think let's go back to the presentation and then circle back to this conversation because I want to look at exactly what we would, once we've seen the full presentation, what would that, if we went above the tax cap, where would we put the money? because it does all have to be estimated out for specific expenses, and we have to justify the need of that to the community. And I think right now we're looking at a budget that justifies it at 3.3. But let's keep going.
Sarah, if you don't mind, promise it'll be under a minute. Just related to the tax cap, this past Friday, our superintendent's group, Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents, invited the Commissioner of Education to our meeting, and we covered a number of topics over a couple of hours, but one of the topics was the tax cap. And Commissioner Rosa has no authority to change the tax cap formula. That's between the governor and the Senate and the Assembly, of course. However, Commissioner Rosa has an awful lot of influence up in Albany. So although in Putnam County, we were the only district to be held to the minimum 3%, there are other districts throughout the state. One particular district in Westchester, without mentioning names, a very affluent district, a very high-performing district, has been held to the minimum, like Garrison, and they are considering an override this year. And the superintendent was concerned about getting that override through, because a 60% supermajority is a very heavy lift. So her question to Commissioner Rosa was, look, you have influence in Albany. She pointed to this data that the tax cap worked from 2012 up until 2021, let's say, but now it doesn't match up to the inflation. And inflation is sticky, and they still don't have it under control. So her question was, Commissioner, would you use your influence and your strong voice in Albany to maybe start the conversation and encourage changing or lifting the requirement of the 60% supermajority? Betsy Rosa said, I cannot support that. That was the answer. Also, speaking to different representatives up in Albany, what I'm hearing is on both sides of the aisle, all of our representatives do not want to touch the tax cap at this time. I personally, as representing Garrison, do hope maybe that will change in the future. But right now, we are living with the tax cap, and I would say, at least for the next couple of years. If inflation persists, I think there's a chance. If inflation is under control, we may have to live with it long term.
That's even more reason why we can't sustain ourselves. Because I thought you were actually going to say that because inflation is so wild, the state was actually considering loosening restrictions over the next 3 years. But you're saying it's not, which means it's going to be even harder for us next year and the years to follow.
Yeah, most likely there's not going to be pressure to change the formula for a few years because a lot of districts are seeing a big influx in money. It'll take a while until all of the contracts that they settle and all the things that they add start to basically make it so their budget gets tighter. So I think it's probably going to be another 3 or 4 years before that is even a discussion, if it is one. So I think there is maybe 10% of the school districts in the state are in the kind of the same boat as us as far as being held to the minimum. The number from 2 years ago, I believe, said that Garrison was 400% of the foundation aid formula, which means we're essentially overfunded by the calculation. So that's why we're held at the minimum hold harmless amount, which is 3%. So I don't see a big groundswell of all of the superintendents and school boards banging on the door right now in order to change that, even though it doesn't 2% or inflation, whichever is less, doesn't work anymore. So
I don't quite understand if everybody sees what's coming in terms of budget shortfalls. Why is there such a deep reluctance to deal with the tax cap? I mean, just politically, what's the motivation?
I think it's just in general, it is that there is a recognition that property taxes from schools in New York State are much higher than other states. And, no one is willing to touch that. And it also goes back to our tradition in New York State that we regulate the effect and not necessarily the cause of why things are. So, that's just been the way politics works, because it's easier to pound on the end result, which is the tax levy and the growth in the tax levy, than it is to deal with the things that affect school budgets in a more broad way.
Yeah, and David, I think it's an important question, but on the national level, right, you look at the debt ceiling issue that we're going to be facing in the months ahead. And as opposed to reducing budgets or increasing taxes, we just keep raising the debt ceiling, and we're at somewhere north of $30 trillion, right? But I think at the state level as well, they want to keep their seat. And if, I think if they touch the tax cap, or, at the national level, if they raise taxes or make deep cuts, they're going to be unseated. They'll be voted out of office. So I do think there's some self-serving interest there. They're scared of it. So again, I've had confidential conversations with representatives who said on both sides of the aisle, no one will touch this tax cap at this time. And again, I think if inflation persists, that may change.
Let's keep going. I get through the rest of it.
Okay, so these are some of the efforts that we've undertaken to kind of mitigate some of these budget challenges. So Carl and the board and we have met with representatives. Carl has also done a mailing campaign to a number of the key players in Albany. So the chair of the Education Committee and the majority leader are some of the key players in terms of the three people in a room type of work that goes on with the New York State budget. The one additional item that we have some news on is that what happens with the budget development in New York State is there's three budgets. There's the executive budget, which is the governor's proposal. There's the Senate budget, and there's the Assembly budget. Once those three budgets are in draft form, the head of the Senate, the head of the Assembly, and the governor meet to discuss and review what the final legislative budget will be. The Senate one-house budget does include a proposal for $180,000 in a grant and aid for Garrison. Now, I don't know that necessarily we can count on it yet. It's still a proposal. So we're going to build the budget based upon not getting that. If we do get it, it would go into fund balance and would help us next year as far as making the lift not as high. But because we won't know about that number until after the board needs to adopt the budget, I'm not recommending that we build that as a part of our revenue forecast.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. This just came through yesterday, and I'm thrilled to see it in the Senate budget. And I want to publicly thank Senator Rawlinson for meeting with us and helping advocate for our district. He is new to our district this year, and we greatly appreciate this. Whether it'll make it through the final remains to be seen. I also really want to thank Carl and Joe for advocating, and Carl for reaching out to any senator you could think of on this. Clearly, it's paying off with the Senate. Hopefully, we can make some headway. It is not in the Assembly budget. I went through it again today, and I did not see us listed. So we'll see what happens when those two come together.
So one of the things that we are looking to do with this budget and is a part of the special authorization we need a proposition for is to enter into a multi-year tuition contract with Putnam Valley. We have a tentative agreement for next year and for future years to use the same formula that that is in place for Highland Falls and for Haldane. And this would mimic the tax cap formula because tuition is a big part of our budget. You know, we don't a lot of people don't necessarily think that that once the students go off to high school, they're Garrison students, but they are, and the district still pays for them. So it's important to do whatever we can to lower the cost of a big component of our operation. So this is to enter a multi-year contract with Putnam Valley that is indexed to the cap formula, which would help us as far as predictability. And I think that this has gone a long way in the recent past over the last year or so to help reduce the upward pressure on that cost. So it is what the board has been able to do in the last couple of years, getting these contracts has been really tremendous. You know, I think it's very important, and we're looking to continue that with Putnam Valley.
Just to clarify on the Haldane contract, while we have a rate negotiated for this current graduating class, our current contract does not extend to any cohorts beyond the current 8th grade. So we will be looking to negotiate a rate with them as part of our 5-year agreement that we are allowed to enter into, thanks to the vote last year, for the following cohorts. And per our previous discussions, we expect to finalize those discussions by June, I believe. Just to clarify that.
So one of the things that is a big component of our revenue, obviously, is the tax levy. So the tax levy is determined by the cap. Based upon some questions that Carl has received over the last several weeks about the tax cap, we thought it would be important to kind of explain it a little bit better as to what the components are, why our number for our proposed levy of 3.29% for next year is not above the cap, and you know how it's all calculated. So there's a formula that New York State has set for the tax cap. It includes the prior year's tax levy, the tax-based growth factor, which is the growth in the overall value of the taxable property within the school district, and that is a number that's determined by the Office of Real Property in Albany, and they tell us basically in December what that number is. And then the allowable growth factor, which is 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. And then any exclusions. And they are for retirement contributions. If there's a growth in the employer contribution percentage, so in addition to employees pay a portion of their salary into the pension, if you're in Tier 5 or Tier 6, you pay all the way through your entire career. If you're in Tier 4 or below, you stop paying after 10 years or some other number. But in addition to that, the school districts also have to put in a percentage, and that number is set every year. If there's a big change in the value or the performance of the pension fund, because the pension fund takes a large portion of money and invests it in order to be able to pay for the future retirees. So depending upon that investment performance, the state sets what next year's employer contribution rate is going to be. If that contribution rate would change more than 2% in 1 year, so 2 percentage points in 1 year, we have a exclusion that we could increase the tax levy by whatever that amount would be. That hasn't happened in a long time, and there is no exemption exclusion for that this year. And then there's the capital levy, which is the local share of the capital expenses for the school. So that is any direct capital fund purchases. So if you budgeted for a capital project in your regular general fund budget, it covers that. And it also covers any debt service on prior capital projects that were done, less any building aid that you get from New York State. And then if there's any court orders or judgments that materially affect the school district at more than 5% of the levy, you can have a exclusion for that, and that could be added into the formula. So the first item there is a tax-based growth factor. That's all of them for Putnam County. Ours is 1.0024, so that's what goes into the formula for Garrison. And then the comptroller publishes in December of each year what the allowable growth factor is. And in December, the year-over-year inflation was 8%, and the allowable growth factor was a quarter of that, or 2% or 1.02. And these are the factors that we have. So we have 0 for retirement contributions, 0 for court orders or judgments. Court orders and judgments are not very common. Those doesn't really happen very often. And then you have the capital tax levy of, in this year, it's $586,991, because that was short-term debt. And then 2023, long-term debt, $706,000, and that's due to the issuance of $8.35 million bond to pay for the balance of the capital project that was not paid for with funds. If you go back to the original authorizations, there was a part of the authorization was to use $1 million plus funds on hand to help pay for the capital project. This is the net of what's left over of the $9 million plus. So this is the formula in all of its components. It looks a little complicated, but a lot of the numbers are basically 0. So in the first part of it is the tax levy from the prior year. There's no prior year offsets. There was no other things that happened to the tax levy in the interim, times the tax-based growth factor. The other thing that goes into it is pilots, or payment in lieu of tax agreements. Garrison does not have any of those. That is a thing that is developed by industrial development agencies that are in every county. There's one in, I believe the offices are in Brewster for the one that's in Putnam. But there aren't, so basically what that is the industrial development agency, in order to attract businesses to an area, they make an agreement with businesses that they will pay a certain amount of taxes, which generally would be less than if it was assessed, the properties were assessed at the rates that they should be. So, and that's to incentivize building or the expansion or location of businesses in a municipality. We don't have any pilots in Garrison. We don't anticipate that there are any that are coming up for next year, so that's a 0. And then you have the capital tax levy exclusion amount from the prior year, which was the $558,000. And then you go to the next, you multiply it by the growth factor, which is 1.02 or 2%. And then you have your tax levy limit. And then you add the capital tax levy for the next year, which is what's this, 706,000. Oops. A little bit too far, I think. Yeah. And we don't have any exclusions for the retirement, and so then that's the limit. And when you look at it in terms of our formula, this is how it breaks out. And the maximum amount of levy under the cap is $341,000, or 3.29%. So That is the maximum we're able to raise with a simple majority vote, and that's what we're recommending.
So
Use the microphone.
our neighboring district, like say Haldane, has a similar percentage, right?
Well,
Three-point.
their growth rate was 0.
So how does it compare with ours right now, the total? Do we know? Is it a 3, are they at a 3 cap?
They were at
3%
about a
cap?
3.87, I believe, last year. This year,
3.87?
it's about 2, 1.9,
One-
yeah. To stand-
1.9?
Yeah, it's much
That's
less.
because they had no tax-based growth factor this year at all.
And they didn't have any increase in debt service. They haven't done a capital project in a long time, and I think that they're looking at planning one, and that is usually when things change with that, the main item that's the change to ours.
So last year was very similar, but this year theirs went down.
I have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but I do know it was in the 3s last year, but that was not an override, that was within the tax cap, following their formula. Their formula will, of course, be different.
Yeah, there weren't many districts that needed an override last year or proposed one. We were at, I think, there was maybe 25 in the whole state, I think. And that's kind of typical, there's not many. All right. We got an extra O there.
It's a lot of O's on that one. You're shouting that out there.
happened,
huh?
but is Garrison seeking an override? No. 3.29 is the limit, and that's a simple majority vote. So when we take a look at revenue, this is updated slightly from the last presentation that we had. The items that are highlighted in green there, I just wanted to kind of point those out as when, these are all based upon estimates. These are based upon estimates that New York State has, and they're based upon estimates that we have when we generate the budgets for both revenue and expenses. So the items there in green for last year those were the estimated amounts. The actual for the 22-23 year is very close to estimates. So 916,000 versus 925, which was originally budgeted. So these budget lines for revenue are generally pretty close to what they actually are. And I think if you remember from the audit report, the revenue was within 50,000 of what it actually ended up being on.
I believe, if I recall, our auditors felt that was a little too close for comfort, in
Right.
fact, as to how closely you were able to get our estimates on revenue to the actual.
Yeah, so the budgets have been very, very tight the last couple of years and budgeted very close to actual. And, it means that any little change, it shows up in the budget. But the year-over-year increase in revenue is 348,000 or 2.88%. And the main item that I think you want to look here is that item that says A5031 interfund transfers. That is the amount of money from fund balance and reserves that are used to support next year's budget. So we budgeted 601,000 for this year. We're budgeting 684,000 for next year. And you're going to ask, well, where is that from? So this is where it's from. So it is, there was a desire, and it was discussed very, very heavily at the Finance Committee meetings, that because the override and doing an override for this current year was such a painful process, and it was very difficult, even though we need the money, the desire was to not do an override for the upcoming school year. And so how can we do that without affecting program? And one of the ways that we can do that is by using the reserves that we have available. So you can see that the biggest contributions to that in terms of the reserves are the retirement reserves, so using the, both redeploying some of the ERS reserves or the employees' retirement reserve to the teachers' retirement reserve. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background on that. Up until a couple of years ago, you weren't even allowed to reserve for teachers' retirement contributions. That reserve didn't exist. It was created, I think maybe 2 or 3 budget cycles ago, that you were allowed to put money towards a teacher's retirement reserve. So we are recommending to the board to use some of the reserves for the current year's expenses. And also there's an item in there to reserve for tax certs. There was a tax cert settlement with the Highlands Golf Course, which is going to be around $28,000, which, you know, the district has to cut them a check for that settlement, and that comes out of the current operating. So we're going to be asking the board to approve that as well. And then you have fund balance and unreserved there, which is a combination of, there was $180,000 of special aid that was given to the district, which was received in this current year, which wasn't included in the part of the original revenue estimate, together with the amounts from the teachers' reserve comes into the fund balance. So then to transfer $225,000 from the employee retirement contribution reserve to the teachers' reserve in preparation to be able to use a significant portion of the reserves for next year. And then there is, we'll talk about it as we get a little bit further, there is a recommendation to use $45,000 of the capital reserve to pay for a component of a capital project that is to be funded with a SAM grant from New York State of $90,000 for the installation of electric water heaters. So those things all added together amount to $684,000 of fund balance and reserves to support next year's budget, reducing the fund balance from $2 million to $1.4 million. And then this is the budget, which matches that revenue amount. So you can see there the main items that have significant changes are the debt service, which we've discussed, and general support, which a significant portion of that, 70% or more, is just the electric cost.
And I know we pointed this out last time, but the employee benefits, which is a negative number there, although we do see an increase from our health consortium, is due to the number of participants in the plan.
Right. So there's less. There are less families, people with family insurance coverage in the plan. There are less two-person people in the plan. There's several two-person that went to one person in terms of retirees. So that was a big part of the net overall reduction, is basically the number of employees that are participating in the plan versus getting a buyout for their health insurance. You know, there's more buyouts and less people in the plan. So even though, you know, if the 5% increase, if that was a 0, that number would be lower by another 50,000. Even lower, but you know, we did have an increase. Last year was 8%. This year is 5.5%. You know, we see upward pressure for health insurance costs. But you know, those are the main things that changed. And then transportation is basically flat, but that's with the reduction of a large bus, which we'll get into. So one of the things to keep in mind is the budget is based upon estimates. It's based upon what we know right now. So those things change as we develop the budget, and some of the things are going to be known in time for the adoption of the budget. Some of the things aren't known. but we have to estimate for what we think they're going to be. So some of the things that still are unknown is one of the things that the district has to do is they publish within all the newspapers an official notice that notifies parents who have students at private schools and requests that they submit a formal request for transportation for the next school year that has to be received by April. And so, you know, if you are within 15 miles of the school district, or your private school is within 15 miles of the district is obligated to transport your child if you request it in time for the April deadline. So we don't have those yet. We estimate based upon what we know. Special education needs as well for transportation. Those are all determined by the IEP, what the placements are going to be for next year. Those meetings are going to happen over the next several months. So we do estimates based upon what we think the placements are going to be, both inside the school and outside of the school, and that has obviously an effect on our budget. And then the other thing that's still an unknown is the GTA contract is up at the end of the year, and you know, we have to estimate what a settlement might be. We don't know what it's going to end up being, but we have to estimate that. And there's some decisions. So the district needs to allocate $684,000 of fund balance and reserves to stay within the cap and to not cut educational programs.
Can I just clarify? In order to not dip into reserves, we would have to ask for an increase in about 6 to 7%.
Yeah,
From the community.
you would need to the significant part of our reserves that we're dipping into is the $437,000 that's out of the teachers, out of the retirement reserves. So you'd need to you need to basically double the cap percentage in order to do that, right? So,
So you'd be talking like 6.6.
yeah. So that's a big lift.
We have $1,000 left for next year, right?
Yeah, and the one reserve, yes, which is nothing.
Right.
Yes. So this plan basically drains the retirement reserves to nothing, which is not recommended, but in order to not cut program and not do an override, this is the only way left to do it. So the use of that amount of reserves only leaves $1.4 million for the reserves as of June 2024. And of that, $900,512 is restricted, that can only be used for capital expenses and debt service. We can't transfer it to another reserve and use it. It can only be used for those things. The other thing to know about that is if we use the debt service reserve to pay for debt service expenses, that reduces the amount of money that we can raise with the tax levy by whatever we use from the reserve. So while it's a big number and it's there, if we used it, it just would reduce the tax levy and drain the reserve. It wouldn't do anything to kind of fill any kind of structural problems to what we have as far as revenue and expenses. Because of the way the cap formula works, it's the capital levy exclusion is the district share that doesn't include reserves. If you use any reserves, it reduces the number. So that amount of available reserves won't support the development of a 24-25 budget without cuts to program, an override, or a combination of those. So these are the proposed cuts as a part of the draft budget. Every time we get to a very uncomfortable part of the presentation, the lights go off.
I think we're being too still. That's the problem.
So,
Less-
okay.
Not enough dancing, Joe.
So reducing the art teacher position by 0.4 FTE is estimated to save $65,000. Eliminating one large 66-passenger bus from our fleet would save $95,000, and that's already included in the overall budget, as well as the other two items, and eliminating the part-time CSE, CPSE chairperson. So, transportation, we've been looking very hard at transportation, and we've been asking a lot of questions of our legal counsel about transportation. And in those discussions, it's essentially been determined that there is an existing law on the books that that has precedence over transportation, and that is that transportation for students that are 2 miles or less from the school in grades K through 8, or less than 3 miles in grades 9 through 12, or transportation provided for private schools for a distance greater than 15 miles away can only be provided by the district pursuant to a voter authorization. So we have been looking internally, and Dusty can say a little bit more about what all the things that we've looked at to determine is, in order to transport students that are less than 3 miles or 2 miles away from the school, the public specifically had to authorize that. And we currently have not found a record that the public has ever authorized that. So unless we're able to find a prior vote that says that the public authorized, effective September 2023, the Garrison School District would only provide transportation for students, for children in grades K through 8 who live more than 2 miles from the school, and for all children in grades 9 through 12 who live more than 3 miles from the school they legally attend, up to 15 miles. So we currently are not in compliance with the law as it relates to transportation, based upon the evidence that we've been able to look at so far. And Dusty, I don't know if you want to maybe comment a little bit on where we've been looking to see if we've ever had this vote.
So based on the recommendations from council to do a search historically to find out whether or not the district ever put forth a proposition before the voters to allow for this. So the first thing I did was conduct a Google search for historical articles and possible legal notices that were sent out by the district for the transportation proposition to allow transport of students who live in less than a 2-mile radius of the school, and there were no results that came back from that. We also reviewed just the district document archives in our storage area, dating back several decades for approved voter proposition. There was no indication of any such proposition, but an additional search is going to be done along with myself and our records management clerk. There's obviously lots of records down in that records room. Some of them are easy to access, some are not, so it's just going to take a little bit deeper dive on our part just to make sure that we've done a thorough search of those records. I also conducted an electronic search of any voter propositions presented that are within our computer systems of former propositions that were put before the voters, and I was able to locate propositions dating back to 1999. There were no results for a transportation proposition in that search. I also reviewed the Garrison's historical policy manuals. if a voter proposition had been approved, that would have likely been reflected in a change in policy within the manual. So I researched back through several different updates of the policy manual dating back more than 22 years, and there was no additional reference for any change in the policy. I also made contact with two of the previous district clerks, one who served Garrison from 1988 to 2010. Obviously, she would have a lot of historical and institutional knowledge as to what may have been presented to the voters in the past. She, in her tenure here of 22 years, she did not come across any of those propositions. And she did state that based on her knowledge as well at that time of the district, that she didn't think that a proposition was likely presented. I also reached out to my direct predecessor, district clerk, who served Garrison from 2010 to 2020. And as of about 7:30 this evening, I got a response from her. I will be speaking with her tomorrow. I also made contact with the former Director of Transportation, who served Garrison from 2003 to 2017. He's also been a Garrison resident for over 40 years. So as a resident who's voted for various propositions over the years, he had no historical recollection of that as well. And also as in his capacity as the Director of Transportation. We also spoke to our legal counsel. Obviously, they have represented Garrison for approximately 2 decades and would have advised the district at some point on the language for such a proposition to be put before the voters. At this point, they don't have any record of that as well, but of course, they'll continue to look for any information that might be available.
I'll just jump in here. We have Carl, Joe, Courtney, and I have spent a lot of time on the phone, obviously, this week with council regarding these questions on transportation. In addition to this, the law does point out, I know we had some questions about how far can students walk. Unless we have this approval, they can walk up to 2 miles to their bus stop if they are between K and 8, 3 miles in high school. So it reflects whatever the proposition is in terms of walking distances. I want to thank Dusty also for all the time and energy she's put into going through the physical boxes this week, looking for any record of this proposition. It's also a very important reminder to all of us on the board. Council does report to the board. The questions we ask council are very important. Trying to figure out exactly what it means when we put things in place. Yeah.
Good question, since we are here. So it's very important for all of our students to get to school, right? This is a rural district. Walking 2 miles is it's not going to happen. It's not safe. There's no way to walk. So if there's a way for us to provide this legally, like putting it up for vote and putting a proposition, if we can't find it in time, to review it with the budget vote, is that an option?
It is an option, and it's one we can discuss.
Okay, so these are your options. So the board could include a proposition with the May vote that would seek approval for transportation in grades K through 8 that live less than 2 miles from the school. It would require a simple majority vote to pass, but if that's the case, the board would have to come up with a recommendation or for us to give you a recommendation for cuts that would equal the cost of what that bus would be.
I also will say I have concerns about if we do put this proposition on the ballot, locking in the district to this cost for the future. And I also have concerns because currently we have a lot of students who travel a great distance to their bus stops, whether they choose to drive that distance or not. It would greatly change our transportation plan in places we are not able to get a 66-passenger bus. So if we change our legal requirement, and again, these are questions we can continue to discuss with council, how close to these homes do we have to get? And what vehicles are needed to do so? Would be some of my questions.
The other thing to just keep in mind, one of the things that has been litigated in terms of commissioners' decisions and as well as state law is the requirement for sidewalks, street lights, or navigable places for students to walk is not part of the discussion. So that in the eyes of the law, whether or not you can physically actually walk it is not.
It's not a requirement.
It's not a
by the law.
requirement.
Yeah.
Do you know if suspending transportation for kids who live less than 2 miles, if that would impose a hardship on any of our current students, and if so, how many?
I know as far as counts, but I don't know the relative hardship of the students. It's probably in the range of 40 to 60 kids.
So I would assume that some of them are going to experience real hardship if there are that many.
But when you say 40 to 60, is that eligible or actually riding the bus?
That's eligible. That's not necessarily riding the bus. There's quite a number of kids that get dropped off and picked up.
And we did raise the question with council, because we do have group bus stops currently in a large number of areas, if you could drive the children from within the 2 miles, outside the 2 miles, and have them ride at a group bus stop, and that was not advised by council. They are not eligible currently to be on our buses. Part of that goes to the aid formula too, that Joe can speak to, as to how we get transportation aid.
Yeah, so part of what happens with transportation aid is every 5 years, there is a calculation on what's called non-allowable pupil decimal. It's something that business officials and transportation people have to do every 5 years. They have to take a snapshot of all the students riding the bus on a certain day and calculate how many of them that you're transporting are actually eligible for transportation based upon the 2 mile radius and how many are not. And then they use that to calculate what your transportation aid is based upon a ratio. So basically every single student, how far they are away from the school, you put that into the calculations, and then it tells you how much aid you're eligible for.
Is there a way to poll the families that this is affecting, just to see if it is going to be a hardship, if we are going to have maybe only 4 students that can't make it versus 50 students, just to get a sense of the magnitude?
Yes.
That's like a quarter of our students. Wow.
Yep.
Right now, Joe, what percentage of students ride the bus versus take
Well,
public transportation?
what we have, we are in the process of collecting those, and when we did a week sample. I've asked Brian to do that on our behalf. He hasn't compiled that stuff yet, but that should be imminent.
And just to be clear, the current budget as presented doesn't include funding for this bus, so should we go forward with the proposition and do that, we would need to either make a cut somewhere or add in money above the cap in order to pay for it, in addition to getting the voter approval going forward.
Is it possible for the budget to pass, but the proposition to go down?
Yes.
In which case, then what happens?
Then whatever is in the proposition you don't do.
The proposition would need 2/3?
The
Yeah, it's simple.
if the proposition, if we take $95,000 out of the budget to pay for it, and the proposition doesn't have costs associated with it, it would need a simple majority. If you don't make any cuts to the budget, and you're going to ask for 95,000 above and beyond what the rest of it is, it would require a supermajority.
And the proposition could be whatever we would want it to be, should we choose to do so. So we could say quarter mile, half mile, mile. We could do, there's no requirement.
It's any distance between 2 miles and
Yeah,
0.
anything less than 2, you would have to
And then
do
again,
proposition 4.
we just have to check our walking distances to make sure that those match as well for transportation from other stops, because they have to be compliant. Is my understanding. We can continue to pursue it with council.
Carl, in your experience as a superintendent in another district, what was your transportation policy? Did you pick everyone up? Did you have this rule in place? Do you recall?
In one previous district, it was transportation for all. And then the one prior to that, it was the 2-mile radius. So, looking at Garrison, just to be clear, I don't recommend any child walk to school on 9D. We do have a few children that cross 90, but we have a crossing guard, and it's, of course, done in a safe manner. We may have I think there's a few families that live behind the school, and again, they don't need to walk on 90, but we all know 90 is a very dangerous road. What this would mean is parent transportation, potentially carpooling, which the district could not organize, but for example, your PTA could get involved with potentially, those who are willing to carpool and maybe help out if there are families in need. So those are just some considerations, but I'm happy to go on record saying I don't recommend any child walk or ride a bike on 90. And I'm not critical of families that allow that. It's just that that morning rush and at dismissal, it is a busy street.
One quick follow-up. Are you familiar with what Haldane does or Putnam Valley? Or
They do not
O'Neill?
transport within 2 miles.
Okay.
Just quickly, didn't you have discussions with, excuse me, the Phillipstown Trails Committee? And is their trail that might be along 9D going to be happening, which would alleviate some of the fear? Or did you, right, I feel like that's a town-wide, committee, but I know that they're working on a trail along 9D.
The last discussion I was involved in was potentially behind our school, requesting permission from our neighbors to cross through their property towards Desmond Fish Library. There are some concerns there. You need permission from the owners. They probably would have concerns about liability, child falling down and getting hurt, that type of thing. We haven't gone as far as contacting each individual homeowner. But again, I think first things first. The board has, and we don't have a lot of time, and I apologize for this, but with this new information that we have, I think the first order of business is, are we thinking about adding a proposition for transportation on May 16th? If so, where would the money come from? If not, then I definitely think we need to start thinking of ways to keep our children safe and assisting in any way that we can. But of course, we can't be directly involved, but indirectly, I would be involved with any organization.
Carl, how quickly can we survey those 40 families who live within 2 miles and find out how much of a problem we have with this? I mean, isn't that something that the board would like to know as quickly as possible within the next week or two?
Oh, yeah. David, we'll get to work on it right away. I think it's a matter of days. We have to give some time to respond to the survey. There may need some follow-up calls. I promise you this, by the next budget meeting in 2 weeks from now, 100% we will have that information. If we can collect it earlier, I'll add it to your Friday update. But yes, that information is critical and I think should be part of your decision-making process.
Let's keep going.
The only other thing that I can add to that is most of the district that I've worked at did provide transportation, but I did work in Poughkeepsie, and Poughkeepsie doesn't provide any. Actually, they do provide for kindergarten, that's it. They don't transport anybody else.
And how did you feel about working in Poughkeepsie?
No comment.
Well, they do have sidewalks, right?
Yes.
They can walk
They generally have
safely
sidewalks,
to school.
yes. They have sidewalks. Okay, so as to budget recommendations, the district should seek a 3.29% tax levy increase to preserve educational program. And just to kind of give you some background, if the proposed budget is defeated on May 16th, the board can hold a revote. They can propose the same budget or a revised one, or the board could adopt and prepare and adopt a contingent budget without going back to the voters. Contingent budget, as you may remember, is a 0% tax increase. We would need to reduce the budget by $341,000 in order to be under the contingent budget. So this is a summary of all the propositions that we would put forth for the vote. Proposition 1 would be the budget amount. Proposition 2 would be to use $45,000 from the capital reserve to come up with the district's contribution for the New York State SAM grant to replace the oil-fired water heaters with electric ones. If this proposition is defeated, Garrison would not be permitted to access the SAM grant for the balance of the replacement costs. So Garrison does get building aid. So building aid is another thing that's based upon need, and they do it in terms of a ratio. So for every dollar that Garrison would spend on capital expenses, they get 10 cents back on the dollar. That's our aid ratio normally. This is aided at a significantly higher rate, obviously. The balance of the main portion of the project would be funded by state funds, so it would make sense to use the grant for this.
What happens if we don't update the heaters?
Well, I think what happens if you do not update the water heaters, you run a risk of not having hot water for people to wash hands and keep the school open. Because essentially we have 2 oil-fired water heaters that are hooked up to a 25,000-gallon underground storage tank. Because the underground storage tank was sized to provide the oil for oil-fired boilers, which have since been taken out of the school. So you have a very large fuel storage tank underground that has very little use on it. And that is a risk as far as the fuel picking up moisture and being able to run those oil-fired water heaters. And at some point, we would recommend getting rid of the underground oil storage tank because that's a risk. So if we don't do the water heaters, we risk not having hot water. I think it may be good for another year or two, but to reliably run an oil storage tank that's mostly empty is not a good idea.
And can we use this fund for some of the IT, the $50,000 IT infrastructure?
Well,
Or
we
does it
have
to be-
proposed to the state that this is what we were going to use it for. We had to propose that last year. So proposition number 3 would be to enter a multi-year contract with Putnam Valley to educate our high school students. And if this is defeated, we would not be able to have a multi-year agreement. And we think that it is, because it's it's good for the students and it's good for the taxpayers, we think that this would have a high probability of passing. So, you know, I think that this, you know, this, I believe the numbers for that, the proposition for Highland Falls and Haldane, you know, there were pretty high numbers on those. Yeah, even higher than the budget.
Yeah, they're about 89% passing.
Yeah, so
Because
I
it
think
just allows us to enter into this is just giving us the option of entering into the multi-year agreement.
right, and it helps preserve the escalation of costs. So I think it would be, it's going to pass. So these are the important dates coming up. We have a budget presentation and tour. This, I believe, will be kind of informal, so it'll be an opportunity for the public to interact with us directly as to, you know, the budget and ask questions as we go along. And then we have our third presentation on March 29th. And then on April 12th, the final budget presentation and adoption. And then on April 20th, we have a community budget forum hosted by Desmond Fish, which I believe it would be a hybrid presentation. We're gonna be physically at the library, but we're also gonna simulcast that with the help of the folks from the library, and we really appreciate that. We have registration May 1st and 2nd, and then May 3rd, we have a public hearing on the budget, and obviously, we want to point out that the important date as far as the budget and when it can't be changed is after April 12th. That's it, the budget is set. That's what we're going to go to the public with, because we have to, you know, have a submission time to notify and all these other things that are required to us by the state. And then we mail, after the hearing, we mail the newsletter, and the vote is on Tuesday, May 16th.
Thank you, Carl and Joe. All right, we're 2 hours into this, and I know this is our budget forum where we've invited the public. I'd like to ask my fellow board members, we've been asking sort of questions all along. Would we be willing to open up the podium to the public, and then we can have a discussion as well afterwards? But I do want to give the public a chance, should anyone wish to come forward. Again, this is a budget forum, so it's just questions on the budget as presented, please. If anyone wishes to say anything. If you don't worry, we can continue on talk amongst ourselves, but I just don't want to keep you here all night. And I would ask that you just please state your name as well. Thank you.
Hi, Eric Arnold. Nice to see you all. I had signed up for public comment, so you can just ignore that when the time comes. So thank you, guys. I know that budgeting is tough, and you guys have had to make some really hard decisions. And now, having seen this twice, I wanted to raise a couple of points and make a suggestion. And the first is on the cut to the art program. I mean, you know, I understand this is a difficult one. Pretty much every discussion I've had with other parents is that they disagree with this element of the budget. From my perspective, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I feel like if we're already dipping so deeply into the reserves, that this ultimately feels like an additional reach to cover that really isn't going to make much of a difference in the grand scheme of things, and we wind up preserving a universally, you know, beloved and dedicated member of the community and the program he provides. Beyond that, I think there's a bigger concern, which is that what does it say to other non-core teachers and staff who've been here for so long? You know, the art teacher's been here for a long time. What's waiting for another non-core teacher after they've been in the school for 15, 20 years? What can they expect when their tenure is coming to an end? And I think it doesn't necessarily send the right signal. So to me personally, again, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I feel like this is a cut that, while it could help in the short term, I think it can do a lot of long-term damage in terms of not just programming, but also in terms of morale. The second thing is on the tax cap, and I'm going to echo a little bit of what Jocelyn was saying before. I know and I agree that there's very little desire to repeat what we all went through last year, but part of me feels like we should really consider that. And in fact, I think we probably have to. If you do the math, or at least I did last year, we were going for 9%, and we ultimately settled on 6 and change. And then if you did another 6 this year, that would essentially get you close to that 9% that we would have been going for last year. And I know this is really scary, and it's. But I think that we need to take another look at it, maybe look at it side by side, because I think it's important for us to be clear with the voters about what this school needs and what it costs. And I know that sounds scary, but there's a couple of things. First, we learned a lot from our initial override attempt last year, and at least I personally and a lot of the other members of the community who I worked with on the second go, we won't make the same mistakes that we made on the first go. I think in a lot of cases we got a little overconfident. We didn't do as much outreach to some people who were on the fence and people who didn't understand. And we were able to flip a lot of no votes to yeses on the second go around. Now, granted, it was a lower number, but we had those conversations the second time that we should have had the first time. So in short, we learned how to win, more or less. Second, I feel like if we don't go for the override now, we lose the opportunity to communicate with people in a way that helps them truly understand the issues facing the school. If we stick with the proposed budget now, come next year when we have to do a massive override, and nobody knows what that is yet, but I think it'll be a big number. I think we all can agree on that. I'm concerned that people will only remember that we made cuts this year, and they'll fight us harder, and they'll say, hey, you made cuts last year, you can make cuts this year too. You made it work last time. People have very, very short memories. And so, and I feel like while there is risk, as Kent pointed out, if we go for an override and we fail, we can, forgive me for misunderstanding, or correct me if I'm wrong, but we can always go back to this budget on a second vote, correct? We could go back to this 3.3. And then we would just need the 50%. So it wouldn't be quite the same situation as last year. So we would basically have 2 bites at this particular apple to a certain extent. And we'd live to fight another day. But at least in the process, we'd have kept the most important pieces of information top of mind with the electorate. And if we don't do that, I'm really concerned that they will forget what this school needs and what it costs. We'd also get the opportunity to communicate the steps for tax relief to lower income people and to seniors, the people who were really concerned about the increases last year. We'll have a better opportunity to not just tell them the relief that's available to them, we'll have the opportunity to show them and basically say, hey guys, we know this is going to be hard yet again, but literally here's the form to fill out. We know you were a no vote or you were on the fence last time. Here's how you get home heating oil assistance. Here's how you get tax relief. That was something that we didn't do last time. It's something we talked a lot more about on the second go around. And again, we learned how to have those conversations that we didn't have the first time. So, again, I think you guys have done a really difficult job very well. I don't envy you at all. I know how hard this is, but from what I've seen now twice, I'm personally convinced, and you have my support if you wind up going for the 3.3, but I think that we need to try the harder path here. And go for the best possible outcome in the short term and in the long term. It's, trying the harder and more challenging path. That's what we ask of the kids every day when they come here. And I think we need to lead by example and do the same thing and, sort of practice what we preach to them. So, yeah, you can strike my name off there, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have anyone else who wanted to speak? Please come on up.
Grady Oaks. I had a bunch of questions, and again, thank you. Thankless work, or not thankless work, appreciated work, but I know can't even imagine how much time you're spending looking at your budgets, and you all have jobs and families and other budgets and other things you focus on, so I really appreciate it. To echo some of what Eric was talking about, and I've heard this from a lot of members of the community, it's in the vision of the graduate that we want our students to model integrity and empathy. And I appreciate that this time at the board meeting, we're talking about an actual person. We're saying this is an art teacher, which means everybody knows who it is versus it being a 0.4 FTE, which is like a pretty clinical way to look at it. I run global sales teams. I understand, like, when you're looking for low-cost solutions, sometimes to be able to fund certain programs, like, I get it. I know that the Artist in Residence program has been like a good thing for the school to offer different choices and different diversity or of curriculum, you know, and things that we would want to have happen, and it's significantly cheaper than having a faculty employee member. I do think that it's pretty tough when you look at the type of person, you know, what Eric's talking about, who shows up with the art supplies to every ask, you know, who goes and buys a face paint and is there at the thaw or the, you know, whatever it is, the Fall Fest, like they're there. Is that modeling what we talk about, like for a graduate of our school? Is that showing that they're thinking about the best interest of others and that they're willing to make that sacrifice? I don't necessarily see that. Some of these are just like rapid fire questions. I don't know how they are, and like they're like bigger immediate issues. Like we clearly have like some electrical cost problems. Like, have we looked at any sort of solar grant that's not going to happen right now and you can't put it in the budget, but like, is there a possibility to like massively reduce our costs going forward? On the budget, the comparison year over year, you have programs for students with disabilities dropping $130K next year. Is that because we forecast that the number of students with disabilities has decreased, or is it that we found efficiencies, you know, in how we help those kids or staff them, or is there anything that you can share about that? I don't know if you're answering questions this time or if this is different.
We
Yeah.
can speak to, that is a question, yeah.
The number of placements are decreased, outside placements.
Okay. Do we have is there like a ballpark? I realize not every kid is the same, but like, is any kid, like, is there an average spend, you know, when you do have a placement? Is it like one
They
kid's
vary
20K?
greatly, and all that information
Tough
is
to get-
highly confidential, so we do not
Not
discuss
possible to
that
give like an
publicly.
average. It's 20K if like there's a kid who has a need. Teaching expenses for regular school only go up 40K next year. So if you're looking at savings on one teacher of 40%, assuming that they stay, I don't know a lot of people that take 40% pay cuts at their job and are really happy about it and think that that's a good thing and don't go looking for something else. But can you speak to, does that give teachers does that give current faculty like a raise? Do they receive anything, or are they flat?
I'll take that. We're currently in negotiations with the GTA. All of that is done through a collective bargaining unit because we negotiate with the union as a whole.
Yeah, okay,
Our contract will expire June 30th. So.
okay. Computer assisted goes up 170K next year. Is that all the stuff that we were talking about, like with the switches and the wires and that? So does that settle out like to like more so what it was this year, 2 years from now, plus or minus a little?
The hardware spend, as far as the installation of the switches and both the hardware itself and the wiring, obviously that goes away in the following year, but a significant portion of the budget for IT is ongoing expenses for both the software and the support of the technology equipment.
And I'll just add, Grady, we're seeing technology expenses in general going up closer to the rate of inflation, disproportionately to our 2% tax cap. So we're seeing things 6, 7, 8, even 9%. So that budget, and we're more dependent on technology, of course. So we do foresee that budget continuing to grow steadily.
Yeah, I hear you.
Minus the special projects that we're doing next year.
Yeah, I work in tech sales. Now's a good time to lock in some savings on some contracts. People are just hammered. I mean, everybody knows technology is suffering right now. Those companies are in a lot of pain. Might be a chance to look at some deals that you have. I'm with Jocelyn. I mean, I'm a believer. I think, unfortunately, people are more motivated by pain than, you know, like the joy that more people care about fear of loss and desire for gain, right? Pain hurts. I don't think our district feels pain. I don't think that I don't want my second grader to feel pain. I don't want your kids to feel pain. But it sounds like this has been an ongoing conversation for 5 years. These are literally the same numbers, only like a little worse. This is what we talked about last year. Sarah, you're saying it's the same thing year after year after year. Like, how do we present to our town, this is what 3 years looks like, this is what 5 years looks like, not just that we're in these moment-to-moment things where it's like, yeah, we're gonna try and move some stuff around and fire a couple teachers. Like, how do we set it up so that people really know what it will look like? That, because it feels like you're starting to get more towards like what a contingency budget looks like, just cost of doing business, 2-3 years from now when the high school expenses explode and everything else is there. Like, have we spent time on that? Like, this is what it will be 3 years from now. Do we get that into the paper so that people understand the need?
Again, I think that Carl could speak to this, and maybe other members too. I think it's difficult to budget year over year without knowing what the students' needs are, particularly when you're looking at some of these high budget lines in special education, other areas that can fluctuate.
Yeah, but some of this we know, right? Like, we know that we have 10x or 10, 17 more high schoolers coming in a couple years. That's, $300,000, at the median of the 3 contracts, right? So $300,000 funds X at our school right now. Like, those are things that we do know that we can't tell people, right?
Grady, correct. I think, I would say that the more you try to project out, the more inaccurate it will be. So just go back 2 years ago. I think there's things we're facing right now that we would have never expected 2 years ago. Inflation is one, okay? At the Fed level, they didn't expect the inflation. Then they expected it to be transitory. So that's just one example. But Sarah's right. There could be, one placement. I think we could speak to this. One special ed placement could range from $70,000 to $130,000. Okay, so and that depends on what you need. So 2 children moving in that have a high need placement that we're required to provide by law is $250,000. Those things are a little difficult to project 2, 3, 4 years into the future.
Right.
Yes, we know next year will be a challenging year, and we are trying our best to communicate that effectively. And again, we have a number of presentations ahead. We're looking forward to Desmond Fish because we'll get beyond our parent community, and we hopefully can speak to people outside of just the school community, but in the larger community. But we could do projections. I've done them before. Joe has done them before. But I will tell you, in year 2 and year 3, it won't be as accurate as people would want it to be.
I mean, fair, right? But I think all of us think about our retirement, and what our earnings will be 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Like, things change, right? Like, you can sell a business, you can get fired from a job. It doesn't mean that you don't plan for the future and that you don't talk to your family about what that's going to be. And I do think there's an opportunity to engage in a different way with our community about what things are going to look like in a couple years. To retirement and understanding that it sounds like it's relatively new that you can stash money for teacher retirement, but what are the consequences of pulling that money now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Like, we've drawn down over the last couple of years on that. Like, does that mean somebody owes down the line?
Yeah, so the teacher's retirement reserve allows the school districts to, if there is a significant decrease in the earnings of the retirement fund for the pension. So the pension, they invest all the money in stocks, bonds, all these sorts of things. And then they look at their performance and they look at their amount of pension funds paid out to the people that retired, and they essentially evaluate how much the districts need to kick in for the following year. If the stock market crashes or there's a significant correction and the fund doesn't make the money, then they increase the pension contributions that the districts have to put in place. And that can make a significant change on a budget year to year. If we use these retirement funds, if the pension has a bad year, the district won't be able to make up that distance with reserves if they don't exist, and we'll have to take it out of program to pay for the pension contribution. Okay. So I think the kind of another thing to put forth about the multi-year projections and things is this budget that we're putting forth and the budget that preceded it were underwater budgets in that they're using more reserves than get replenished. So it's not sustainable currently with what we're doing. So to project out multiple years into the future, we can project a more and more negative number. So it's possible to do that. But right now, the budget in its current form is underwater in order to be able to deliver what the public wants as far as an equivalent educational program and still fit within the amount of revenue that comes in. So,
Do you think that the community knows, like, and this is a philosophical question, but like, do you think the community knows just on a run rate, right? And back out COVID, like, or put it at -10, you know, but between COVID and inflation, do you think the community knows just like on a run rate, we've been drawing down from the reserves, these reserves built budgets. This is what this looks like 2 years from now, 3 years from now. If things are flat, you know, like back out some of the special education, which, you know, and put big asterisks on it. Like there's just no way people understand that this is what's going on. They just don't. They just don't. It's the same 5 people at these meetings every time. And I know, and people reach out to me, and I hear from PTA, like, I mean, I hear people, like, they do watch the videos, they pay attention, but, like, there's a lack of understanding on this stuff.
To Joe's credit, in last year's budget presentations, he did scope out where we would be.
100%. Yeah, it's in there. It's, y'all work really hard. Y'all work really hard, and you
No, but Joe did scope out,
180 of that
like,
came from the state.
long-term, like, we are going to go underwater, we don't have the reserves.
Right.
We do know that, and I appreciate, like, that ideally, we just ask for more money. It's not without risk, and I'll keep going back to that. And I recognize we might need to do this next year and ask for money, but we've figured out a way to not do that this year. And I don't think this is the way the tax cap works and the majority, supermajority necessary. I don't think you can continue to go back and ask for higher taxes over and over without making massive cuts as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we need to figure out the path to be able to ask for those amounts of money year over year. And I'd imagine if we went back and looked at it, that we would see that there were probably years over years of not asking for that money. And we certainly knew that this stuff was coming. Y'all talk about it. We knew it was coming.
But the problem with asking year over year is you have 200 students in the school. You have 2,000 people in the community.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the community does not send students to the school. So I think we went through this a lot last year. There's not an appetite year over year for a supermajority to pass the budget. And so we have to be very careful with how we use our money. And when we make an ask, we need to do it with very thought out reason. We don't think we need to do, I don't personally think we need to do that this year. I recognize it makes for a challenging next year, but it is hard to plan for the future. If anything, I walked into this job saying, why aren't we doing 5-year plans and doing this and put money here and doing all, you can't do that. You don't know what you're getting next year. You don't know what's coming down the pike. You don't know what your expenses are. So we're doing the best we can with this year, but I do think it can't underestimate the trauma, honestly, that it puts on the staff of the school. If we have to put a contingency budget out that says, like we did last year, naming teachers that would be gone, those are people's lives. You can't do that every year. You can't roll those dice every year, I don't think, personally. So we have to work with what we got, and just in my opinion,
I hear you.
again, it's up to
Yeah.
the rest of the board as well, but
There's also an argument, just as I appreciate the feedback of the support to go for an override saying, you know, you'd vote for it. And I do think there are members of the community that feel that way. But the flip side is that there are certainly members of the community who would say, why are you asking me for more money? You've got the money. Pull it out of all the places that Joe has pulled it out of and the finance committee has gone over to say, you know, to go use up all your money and then come back to us and ask for more.
yeah, we did hear that almost in the exact same words from several people of the public.
I'm frankly concerned about passing a 3.3.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing in the community, I know we all touch different aspects of the community at different times, but I think there's a real concern there sometimes too. That I think Joe did a great job tonight in educating the community as to why that is under. We talk about this 2% number a lot, but we can stay under the allowable
Totally
at
agree.
3.3,
That was very
and
helpful.
people are like, "Well, I don't understand." There's a number of slides here that I think really break down that for us people who aren't into finance.
I'm
Regarding that, I just feel like the community that we live in here, as you pointed out, Joe, for example, with the state aid, has high value, so to say, and extremely high median income. And we do offer exemptions and reductions in their taxes folks pay based on income, based on social statuses like veteran status, or perhaps even firefighter, for example.
If we get to it tonight.
Right. So, but the point is, the community, I mean, we pay the lowest taxes in the region, and so there is potential to pay more. We know that because we live in a high wealth community.
I do want to keep getting through all the people too, so.
Thanks.
This is great. No, this is great, though.
I hear you. I guess like the last one that I really have, and I don't know if this is the place to answer it, but I'm from Texas. When I was growing up, they rejiggered how they fund schools. You know, I came from a high net worth community, so of course they called it the Robin Hood plan. You know, they were stealing from wealthy districts to give it to these poor kids down in the valley, like take away the moral upside downness of that, you know. But what our school district did is we were the Fighting Scots, and we invested in a program called Mad for Plaid, which was GSEF on steroids, like significant funding to help you know, earn or raise money from the 200 people that are involved, you know, have students at the school, or maybe people whose children benefited from the school, or people who live here and have made a ton of money in their careers and really value having a quality school in their neighborhood. I don't know, like, this might not be a now question or that there's an answer, but like how do you build a budget with private grants, with more money, with like a GSEF that doesn't raise 50 grand a year but raises $10 million? You know, is that an option? Like, can you think about that, or do you not want that private money because it's hard to count on it being there?
I think that is a wonderful conversation to have with GSEF, Carl, and Joe, and bring them in, facilitate that. It's definitely longer than we want to start at 9:21 tonight, but I think that is a very valuable conversation to have with those parties involved. And because there are a lot of components to that answer, I'm sure, in terms of the legality, where would the money go, what is the possibility of funding. But I know, Carl, you guys would welcome that conversation, I'm sure, to really dig into that. I think that'd be great.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Again, thankless, tireless work. Well, not totally thankless. Thank you, though. But appreciate it. It's helpful. Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, I'm Michael Rauch. Thanks for your work on the budget. It really was helpful to see it gone through like that. I'm mainly just stalling because Grady stole a bunch of my talking points. But the couple of things I wanted to ask. I don't understand the risk. I mean, I think that there is support in this community for a bigger budget. I think, as has been said, we sort of, quote unquote, learned how to win a little bit last time. I think if our goal is a bigger, I forget the word, let's just call it budget, we have to keep inching there every year, every time we can, every opportunity. So I don't understand, say we try for a bigger increase and miss, can we then go to this budget? Or is that not an option? We have to go to a different budget that would be worse than this.
You could go to this budget or a different one if you went for it. We do know that there is a risk just from watching budget votes in the region. The most specific that I know in the recent history is Carmel. Carmel did not ask for an override, but the public was so upset they voted the budget down twice, and they had to go to contingency. So there are risks out there, even if you have a budget within the limits of missing. And the other thing that can't be understated is, you know, when we had to do that second vote, we did list all the things that we would have to cut if we had to do a zero. Yeah. And those things are real, and they are big with the availability of funds that we have. So those are the risks. So we're worried about, I think, alienating the people that don't have students that go to Garrison, we're worried about making them upset enough to come out and vote no. So I think that's the risk about, going for an override and then backing off.
I mean, I think it goes back, it just goes back to the memories I have last year, being in that parking lot, teachers crying because they know they're on the list to go. They find that out in these meetings, that they're on the list to go if the contingency budget doesn't pass. And we have a lot of teachers that were on those lists, and thank goodness most of them came back. If we do that to them again this year, you won't see them here next year. And
I think we did lose staff to that last year, and you push people, every other district around us has that much more money to offer teachers and contracts. We don't have that money. And if we threaten their jobs, I'm very concerned as to what we will have for staffing.
When you say we threaten their job,
It's the community.
It's the community. It's not like you or you.
But when we build the contingency budget.
regardless, their
district,
jobs are,
yeah.
yeah.
We're to the point where contingency budget is just staffing,
Yeah.
because everything else we have to provide, so.
I do think to the point, we did promise, part of what passed, I think, helped pass the budget last year was the promise that we wouldn't go for an override this year.
That was not a proposition. That was just said by some
That was just
people.
said.
Yeah,
I
so
said
that
it.
didn't-
I said it.
Repeatedly.
And I meant it.
Fair enough. I'm not trying to convince
But,
you otherwise. I'm
no,
just
and
trying
it's
to
not up to me
understand, yeah.
entirely, but
Yeah.
I truly think that what these guys have put together for this year does not, somebody made mention of cutting the art program. The art program is not being cut, just to be very, very transparent. Students will receive the same amount of art as they have this year and the year before. There's been no cut to the art program. We're simply finding a way within our budgetary means of keeping the same programming, making tough decisions. I'm not happy about it. Nobody's happy that we're doing that. But we're keeping the program exactly the same. And that was what our goal was without having to go for an override because of the things we've been talking about. So I do appreciate, I wish that we could go for a much higher percentage and not have to make any cuts and improve programming and spend more money. But that's just not where we are right now. I don't believe in the community.
I will say, to add on to the art program, it is the exact same art program that we have this year. We have less cohorts because we've cut other staff. So instead of having 2 third grades, 2 fourth grades, we've reduced those elementary teachers in past budgets. We've reduced staff so that all these cohorts are combined, so there's less cohorts going to specials. To increase the job to a point one would take away from another area in order to fill that time as well.
Understood. You explained the risks, I guess.
If I could add just one other perspective, I know it's getting late, but just strategically in looking at the numbers. We also, last year, the board probably remembers, we did an analysis of percentages of budgets in the past, how much they passed by. And I will say, we're in the range on average, my recollection is somewhere 60, 65, maybe 70% majorities. That is low comparatively. And I have a theory on that, and I think part of that is because we're a K-8 district. You see higher percentages of passing rates in K-12 districts, and I think what happens in Garrison, my third year, I'm settled in more and understand the community better. When our parents move on from 8th grade and select a high school, they're engaged in that high school. They see themselves as high school parents, whether it's Haldane or O'Neill or wherever they are. And I think they're not paying as close attention to us anymore, and that's completely understandable. Life is busy, you're supporting your children, and Dusty's pulling up the numbers, but, just to go back, you're talking, 75, 67, 76, 68% passing rates. Now, that's not with an override proposal. That's just a regular budget. In my home district, for example, years back, we had to do 2 overrides. It's Mamaroneck, and it's a K-12 district where most people use the school. On an average year, you're passing by 90, 92%. And when they needed to do overrides, they were able to, do them quite easily. But it's a heavier lift here. It really is just looking at the past, votes, and we were thoughtful about that. So yes, there's the side of the impact emotionally to staff and the instability that it causes, but just looking at the math, it's a challenge here.
I get that. I appreciate that. I think just on the other side of the coin, real quick, I think, going into reserves, which sound like kind of a buffer structure to me in sort of what's happening out there in a macro sense, seems pretty scary too, and a lot of high risk in that. And I think those are, educators that we valued for a long time and that we're trying to, serve. I think, reducing that buffer before we cut into programs in this environment seems a little bit scary. So I don't, having watched tonight, and granted, I don't have the history in this, I don't feel as secure in this budget as it sounds like some others in the room might. That this is, a plan that's going to work long term. It seems pretty close. And I have a kid in kindergarten, so I'm new at this, and I have 2 more behind him. I'm a guy that's going to be relying on this school long term. I'm happy to pony up more through GSAF or whatever. I mean, my alternative is probably private school. I don't know what it is. So, I can do more. I want to do more. And I just am nervous about using buffer in a time like this. Tonight I came because, I understand the art cuts aren't cutting program, but, if I am the art teacher, I do start thinking about other things. And to us in our house, when our guy started kindergarten, the 2 things that sort of sparked him were the bus ride, who would have thought, maybe all you knew, but the bus ride he's really excited about with Ray and Kathy Clark, and then art. I mean, we don't hear anything about school. We hear about art or, about other parts of school. We only hear about art and the bus ride. So that's it for us. So, we're cutting bus rides and art right now to some extent. It's different for every kid, but who are we to decide what's going to be the thing that gets them engaged, right? For us, we found out that it was bus rides and art, so here we are. So I'm feeling a little bit protective of those 2 things in particular. And then the last point maybe is a high note. Really, the only thing I know about in this world is solar energy. So I'd love to help you with that. There's the Inflation Reduction Act, which made a 30% investment tax credit that funds solar available to non-tax-paying entities through a direct pay option. So, as of last year, solar got 30% cheaper for you. Just between us, there are some folks that rope in the fixes to the roof that are necessary for the solar plant, so you can get some payment help on the roof fixes as well, which I understand might be a thing. And believe it or not, even better, there's another parent of a kindergartner who does the same job I do, and we'd both be willing to help you figure this out. So that's a plug.
I think we need another meeting set up soon, please. Hi, Nita Prentice. I was elected to the school board in 2001, and at that time, for many years, the transporting every child practice had been in place. So I'm sorry you spent all your time on the past 20 years. The policy was probably put in the 80s or 90s. I don't know when the education law was actually passed. My husband, who grew up here, said kids did walk to school. He wasn't sure if it was a mile limit or 2 mile limit, but so sometime between the 60s and the 90s, that practice was adopted. We also had a really great transportation study done, which would have been, I can't think of the year, but between 2001 and 2012, somewhere in there. And I'm sure that consultant would have told us that we needed to do a proposition. So I'm guessing that that the district maybe did have the proposition passed, but many, many years ago. Anyway, just a guess, I'm not sure. Question, high school transportation, is the Putnam Valley option going to cost more in terms of transportation? Is that included in the numbers here?
Joe.
Costs for transportation for Putnam Valley is included in the budget, yes.
And it's,
We need a van for it because we have potentially 5
okay.
children.
Okay,
So
not
it's
a
not as much as a large bus. It's not an insignificant cost, but it's not as much as that.
Okay, great.
Great. And when I was on the school board, we didn't have a tax cap, and it just required a lot more voter education, kind of like what Eric was talking about. But and the communities, I think the tax cap has created, voter complacency and indifference, and was really hard to fight last year. And good luck with your decision. But I would vote for an override, and my husband would too. But good luck.
But let me ask you, as a former member of this board, would you recommend that we go for an override, or are you saying that you would personally vote for one? But it's a risky business here, right? And I'm just curious to know what you think.
I don't want to. I don't feel comfortable making a recommendation to you all. You know much more about it than I do at this point. I actually tend to agree with Jocelyn and Eric and Mike that it's a bullet you should bite. But then, sorry, I should have chosen a less violent metaphor. But but I think about the long-term future of the district. I mean, something's got to change. Thanks.
Anybody else want to add to our budget forum this evening? All right, thank you all. So board members, it's getting late. We have some more items we need to get through here. In terms of decisions, though, that we need to make going forward with our timeline, we only have 2 more public meetings before we really decide whether we're accepting or asking Joe to rebuild this budget in a different way. Our discussions cannot happen offline, they happen here. So we might want to sort of gauge consensus. I think we can get a feeling of it right now in the room. We can do this again, and of course, in 2 weeks, or call another meeting in between if we feel we need it. That may be another option we wish to explore. Kent and I are obviously on the finance committee, so I'll start, but I feel like I'm comfortable with the budget. I think it is scary that we're going this deep into the reserves. But looking at the community, I am concerned about passing an override this year, especially when we can make the case that we can do it with what we've got. And I think this is really an educational year of driving home that we may need one next year, would be my view. But I want to open that up to everyone else and get a consensus of where we are, because we will need to vote on this on April 12th. And if we need to rework these numbers because we have consensus to move in a different direction, we should start that sooner rather than later.
I kind of have a heart-brain problem with this because my heart is with Jocelyn, and I'm really not sure what I want to do with this, because I think Kent's point and his concern about the risk that we would be undertaking and the consequence of losing it is pretty serious. So I'm not ready yet. But I would also say that, and I hope this isn't too much of a side point, but there's something that this evening's conversation has, to me, an implication for curriculum as well. And here's what it is. We're talking about the unwillingness of our community to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. That's the issue, right? And Joe talks about how the federal government doesn't want to either make cuts in the budget or raise taxes. And, with respect to maybe the single biggest existential threat that we face, climate change, excuse me for bringing that up, that is a fundamental point about it, that there is an unwillingness on the part of American society to make short-term sacrifices for existential reasons. And that's not a joke. I mean, that's really serious. That is something that I think, that schools that are kind of mediocre sometimes miss dominant patterns of a society. We've learned that about race, we've learned that about gender. And I would sort of, in some way or other, like to see the kids understand that this society as a pattern, including our community here, doesn't want to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. That's all I want to say about it.
I just have a couple notes. One, so to start with is, I like, David, the way you put it as the heart-brain problem, because none of these are easy decisions. However, I do agree with Kent and Sarah about where we are, about the fact that we have the money to support this budget, and it lays the groundwork for next year. And that's, I think, what we're going to be spending the next 12 months talking about as a board and as a community, preparing ourselves for what is to come. To briefly visit the busing question, I would just like to ask, when you do the poll to families that live within 2 miles, if you can ask for, when you give out that information, if you can include the breakdown of locations of families that live half a mile, 1 mile, 1.5 miles. I just did a quick poll of surrounding schools, and I don't have all the numbers, but it's definitely piecemeal. There doesn't seem like there's a lot of schools that put in a 1 mile or a 9/10 of a mile limitation, so that might be something to look at if we're talking about 40 kids and it turns out that the numbers don't split evenly, and that we can serve the most number of students. And also, I know that from the last meeting, Joe, you were talking about, which is no easy undertaking, is looking at all of the busing maps and figuring out how to serve a great number of students with only 3 buses. And if you were able to do 3 buses that include students outside of 1 mile, I know there's all these permutations, and you wear many hats, and you are limited by the daylight hours to an extent. And then lastly, I just want to really say, I really want to be careful of our language collectively, and asking the community to we are not cutting the art program. We are not cutting the arts. I myself am an artist. I have brought 2 children through the Garrison School District. Art is incredibly important to our family. I learned from when my kids were really young to always, I'd pick them up and say, hey, what did you do in art today? Because that would get them talking. It is unfortunate the way that this budget is being shaped, and that there is a reduction in salary. We are not cutting the art hours that the students in the Garrison School District are getting. They are getting the same hours that they got last year and the year before and this year, and the plan is that they would get the same next year. We are not cutting the art program.
I do have some question about the projected, sorry to go back all the way to the beginning of the presentation, but the projected number of students within the budget. How much more? What's the difference between the actual this year versus the projected for next year?
Okay, you're talking about the high school enrollment?
Talking about all of the students in this building.
Yeah, so, yeah, we
Yes.
broke it down into primary grades, intermediate, middle school. Madeline, just I'll speak to that quickly. Those enrollment numbers, with the exception of next year's pre-K and next year's kindergarten, which we have a pretty good idea. I think the projections are pretty accurate because, again, keep in mind we have pre-K this year. So there are 11 students and they're already registered. But those are projections. Every other grade level is based on students who are actually here, and we believe they will be returning in September, unless we have some, a parent indicated they may be moving over the summer or something to that effect. So really the only projected grade levels are pre-K and K next year. Everything else is pretty accurate. Certainly, one or two could move in, one or two could move out, but I think those numbers are pretty reliable.
So how many students we have in the building versus how many students in total we're building this 2023, 2024 budget based on?
Slightly less next year because this year's 8th grade is going to graduate 28 and you have 19 coming in kindergarten versus 32.
That's your differential.
And you do have a few more, what do we have, 11 in pre-K right now,
expecting
going up to
15,
15. So there's a few more gains there, but it still doesn't really equal the estimated kindergarten increase.
Overall, you may be down by 4 or 5,
Okay, so
but
there
that
is
can
that
easily
risk
change.
in next year that we do end up getting more pre-K or kindergarten than what we have now.
Well, we,
Or
we-
any
You could always get someone that would move in, and we don't necessarily account for extras. The only extras that we account for is 2, which is hardly any, extra high school kids that we don't necessarily know about, because sometimes kids that are in private school in K-8, when they get to 9th grade, go to public high school as opposed to going to a private school. So we have 2 in there, which is very little of terms of extra. But if we add a student here or there to the pre-K through 8, in general, we're okay as far as our class sizes. You have a few that are in the primary grades that are probably close. Like if we, for some reason, got 3 more people in 3rd grade next year that just showed up, that might be a problem, You're getting close to a big class section. But in general, if we get a couple more elementary school kids, it doesn't have any effect on our budget.
Okay, thank you. So my take is that we definitely should add the proposition of the bus. That's, I guess, a larger discussion, aside from discussing whether we keep with the cap or not. But once we get the polls and get more information, I think as a board, we need to decide that quickly. I did see that there were 2 or 3 other propositions there for consideration. So it would be good to also include that one for a decision shortly.
I think
If we don't, if we need it.
we need to know
We need to know what you're
We need
willing to give up from the educational program to do it.
to make that work. Or the question we can go back to council with is, could we add it as a budget line item? So we would guarantee it for 1 year at $95,000 for next year as a proposition. And then we would reoccur that proposition maybe the following year, if that's legal. Now that, we'd have to go back to council with that as, you'd need a supermajority on that 95,000 because it then is an override of the tax cap, but it separates it out as a line item budget so that people can vote on transportation separately versus the entire budget. I don't know if we can do that yet. We'd have to ask council and really drill through that.
I'd also urge us to stop before we put anything on the ballot and really do a deeper examination of the data, how many kids there are within the different distances, and find out things like how many kids are being driven to their bus stop within 2 miles.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that one
That's
too.
certainly what happens in my family. And then also, what is our obligation in a proposition? Is it we have to pick up every kid at their door, or can we group bus stops? I mean, because that goes into also the idea could we figure
So
out a way to make it
That
work?
I know from council is you don't need to pick everyone up at their door. You can group bus stops, and we just need to set them whatever distance they are away from the home. So we could right now, I know we do it some is based on where the buses go, but we could make them all 2 miles from the house unless we have a proposition on the ballot saying we're going down to 1 mile or we're doing transportation for all.
I guess my point is, if we're going to do a proposition, I want to know if we could still, is there a way to do that, but also protect ourselves from the 95,000? I mean, if there's a way to say you can transport certain kids within a certain distance, but we're not picking them all up at their house, you have to go a little further, then we can figure out a way to make it work with our current 3-bus proposition now. That would be more preferable to me than putting it up on the ballot that we will pick up every kid within 10 feet of the school forever. Because I feel like we do need to at least think about how we word this to protect ourselves a little bit from a budgetary point of view.
Yeah. All right, so there's definitely more questions for council on that, and we'll circle back to that, as well as more research on Dusty's end.
If you are considering putting that on the ballot, but you don't want to do an override to do it, you have to give us suggestions on what of the program you're willing to give up to pay for it.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, Joe, there is not even an option to use any more fund balance.
There's no more.
We only have 250 left
Yeah.
to this proposal.
I'm not
in
recommending it.
unreserved.
But just to be clear, we're using whatever is available.
We're using an uncomfortable amount of reserves to
leaving.
do next year's budget.
Very little for emergency situations.
I also just, no, Jocelyn, you want to jump, in terms of doing an override this year, I am very mindful that we are currently not in contract. We won't have a contract for the teachers next year, and to negotiate while going out for an override feels a little uncomfortable to me.
As board members, we would, because like, we can't really go out and advocate too much for the budget anyway, so we can spend our time doing contract and
No,
let
in
the
terms of
community
if the
do-
budget goes down and we don't have a contract set. And so we're looking at what we would need to cut on contingency as well as not having a contract. I think it's it's a higher risk in my mind.
I would just say regarding the potential override, if we're leaving 250 in the unreserved fund, which is 2% of the budget, I mean, why not why not meet halfway? You're right, we need like 900,000 to not dip into our fund balance and to not make any cuts. But you know what, so we only need 8 or 7 now because the 95,000's gone. So we really need 700, or, 7% extra, so a 10%, in order to really do everything without dipping into our fund balance. But we know that's excessive, so could we explore a budget that's less than 10% and instead 5? 5% would allow us to keep 250 extra in our reserves for when we get 2 high school students who need special education services. I don't know, I'm just, like, could we meet people halfway? These imagined people, because no one's come out yet to say they wouldn't vote for it.
Well, I think based upon what happened last year, I think what we're really concerned about is the people that don't have students here at Garrison woke up when we decided to ask them for an override. And if, because we said already that we're not seeking an override, we have a very small crowd here. I think if we came back around and said, we're going to have an override, the people that told us to burn all of our fund balance will show up. Right?
It's another opportunity to educate.
True, it is.
All right. Well, at this point, counting 3, we don't really have consensus either way.
Have a majority. Do you need 100% agreement, or you have your
No,
majority?
no.
Right.
We need more information, but in terms of really pursuing an override, I don't want to push Joe into doing a different budget within a week. Like, I want to be realistic as well. Although it does sound like what you're asking is really transferring the money to taxes from the fund balance. So that is an easier lift for sure in terms of communication. But it's not something
I would note
support.
that's a pretty difficult political sell. We want to tax you more so we can keep more money in a fund.
It's not something I support.
I
but if
wouldn't.
the
I
rest of
wouldn't
the board
imagine
goes-
that would be a very easy sell to the community.
I guess, except that we pay the lowest tax rate.
Again, though, that
People
don't. That's why they move here.
Okay, I think that's fair.
A lot of
Yeah, I
people,
think
I
a lot
know
of
it's
people
not-
like it. And I'm already hearing rumblings that 3.3 is too high. And that concerns me. And I think a lot of that stems from they don't understand the formula as to how did you get to 3.3 and why is that not an override. I'm hoping that this presentation and this information will bring understanding to that too. But that makes me nervous. That was great, thank you. All right. So in terms of more questions, because again, this isn't something we discuss outside of meetings. We're going to have questions for legal on the busing. I'll get answers on that. But right now, from what I'm hearing, is that we are sticking with this plan, although we do have some concerns about the fund balance. Yeah, and we want to hear more from the community.
We have very big concerns about that. Do you need a yes or no from me tonight?
I don't. I just want to be mindful that I want to think about our timeline, not push this too close.
understand
And make sure
that.
that
I
we're
get
clearly,
that.
because we have community presentations. I'll be at the one on Saturday on the 25th. Thank you. God, I really want to move that date in my mind. And if other board members wish to attend, let me know. We clearly don't want to have a quorum. So. All right, but I think it's also, I recognize it's getting late, and we should have to get through our agenda.
Is it possible for you to just ask the board to tell you by Friday where they stand, and if we need to have another meeting next Wednesday, we could call a meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's fair. So keep your calendars open for Wednesday, please.
By this coming Friday?
Yes, and that gives Matt time to review as well. I'm sorry he wasn't able to join us this evening.
We're not going to have the busing information.
We will
by then.
not. And we have a lot more legal questions on that, I'm afraid. I want to make sure we get to the bottom of that in terms of whether there was one in the past. And then again, how we could word that potential proposition, especially if we're attaching money to it. And what that means for the future if we're locking ourselves in. Those are big questions. So I will talk to our lawyers. All right. I'm going to close this discussion and move us on to the next discussion, which is a discussion of proposed property tax exemption for volunteer firefighters and volunteer ambulance workers. You all have a copy of this. I mentioned this briefly last time. So basically, we have until, I believe, December 2025 to decide on this. However, I know the county has acted. This is calling for a tax exemption up to 10%. I believe we can adjust that lower should we decide, but we decide on the number in the proposed resolution of the assessed value of the property for firefighters and ambulance workers who live in the county served by their volunteer organization. To apply for this exemption, the property must be owned by the volunteer firefighter and ambulance worker. The property must be their primary residence. It must be located within the jurisdiction served by the fire company and department or ambulance service. And the volunteer firefighter ambulance worker must be certified by the authority having jurisdiction over the fire company, fire department, or ambulance service as being an enrolled member. In addition, for a volunteer to be eligible for the tax exemption, they must meet a minimum service requirement of 2 to 5 years. Now, we would decide whether it's 2 or 5 years or anywhere in between. So should we decide to go forward with this, I want to be clear the decisions we need to make are what is the percentage, how many years, in additional to the general exemption, so that would qualify as the general exemption. School districts may, and this we would need a public hearing should we wish to move forward with this, exempt any volunteer firefighter or ambulance worker homeowner after 20 years of service, provided the volunteer worker maintains their primary residence in the county for which their volunteer organization serves. So that would make it permanent after 20 years of service. That is an option. That doesn't come with the other exemption. Extend the benefit to unremarried surviving spouses of deceased eligible volunteers. And then we could also extend the benefit to unremarried surviving spouses of eligible volunteers who die in the line of duty. So those are the three options. And what we need to decide if we would like to move forward with this, we have time on this. However, if we wish, and we cannot make the deadline of having this for next year, I'm just mindful that our county is acting on this as well. We can set a public hearing. So the thoughts on this are, is this something we want to pursue? That's question one. Like, do we want to offer this? And to be clear, the tax exemption, Joe, you can speak to this, spreads it out.
It works like the senior citizens and disabled exemptions in that that person gets an exemption, and then that the cost of that exemption is basically reallocated to the rest of the tax levy.
So nothing we do tonight or have a public hearing in 2 weeks is going to make this, if we decide to go forward, does not make anybody, does not go into place this year.
And
So,
do you want to move it?
I vote to table this, given the late hour. I fully support it. I'd love to have a conversation see how other people think and throw in and figure out these numbers. But I make a motion to table this to another meeting.
Are we all in favor of tabling this? Take a close look at it, so next time we can really know our numbers on this, please.
We'll do our homework, we promise, Sarah.
Thank you, all right.
Busy. Should we table it until the summer?
Let's maybe table this to May. I think that would be good. I don't want to push it out too far. I want to be mindful of that. Yes, please. Discussion and approval of the 2023-2024 school calendar. Carl, do you want to speak to the, oh, sorry, do I need I need to vote on that. Thank you. Yes, all in favor of tabling until May? Aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? Thank you. Calendar. Carl, you want to speak very quickly to the calendar?
Very quickly, it came together nicely. I think all the things that our staff and community and parents welcome is in this calendar. Things like starting after Labor Day for students, full recess breaks, winter break, February break, full week off, and in April as well, a week and 2 days actually then for families to plan vacations and such. It does take us a little later in the school year than we typically go, which is through June 26th, but that's required because we offer Regents exams, and the New York State Regents calendar goes through the 26th. And we don't know when each specific region will be, but at least extending the calendar and ending on June 26th covers us. So you've had some time to look at it. I'll take questions if there are any.
Anybody have questions on the calendar?
Appreciate that you're starting after Labor Day.
No? All right.
Okay.
Read the be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, hereby approves the 2023-2024 school calendar as presented. May I have a motion,
So moved.
please?
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? All right.
May I add one more thing?
Yes.
It's very aligned with all three high schools, not exact, but very close, which I know families welcome.
All right. Next, on to new business, a request for approval to revise substitute rate for bus driver. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, hereby approves the revision of the rate of pay for substitute bus driver from $19.25 per hour to $28 per hour, effective March 16th, 2023. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk
So
very briefly.
this is on the agenda tonight because there's a desire to maintain this substitute bus driver rate at something that is comparable to what the other districts around are paying, because using a substitute driver at this rate, while it makes it different than what our custodial worker bus drivers pay, It is competitive with the rest of the market and allows us to have these services at a cost that is less than getting them through Orange County. So that's why we're recommending it.
Due to the budget.
What it does is it allows us to deliver transportation routes cheaper than we could buy them outright. So
Are you asking what the increase is this year,
Increase-
right now?
Yes, this year.
we have enough in the budget to be able to absorb this.
Substitute driver drives substitute or like has a regular?
They typically drive very frequently and is on a more regular route, but it is, we do, with this particular individual, we do have times when he cannot drive and our other employees pick up what he does when he can't.
He's currently employed here. Okay.
Do you have any other questions or concerns?
I would say I like paying people more, but I do think it's paying them a lot more compared to some of the other people that we pay. And so it's just, I think something we should think about, but it's a big problem with, a limited budget.
Yeah.
But I do believe that we need to be competitive on all of the, lines that we have.
There are districts both north and south of here that pay even more than that for bus drivers. The bus driver pay has increased significantly since the pandemic.
There are a lot of certifications required of bus drivers as
Yes.
well that we need to be mindful of. It's not easy to find right now.
So is this changing it for one staff? or
Well, we
will it
only have
be
one that is in this category. If we were
any
able to hire more, which we might next year, depending upon some individuals that are also on the agenda, we would use this for others.
We don't have the ability, though, to set pay rates per individual. It has to be per category in this area, so what applies to one will apply to all.
And you'll have another chance, we could discuss the rate at the reorg meeting, because we update rates annually for these types of things. So this is really, you're approving it from now through June.
So I just have to say that it's kind of tough approving an increase when we're looking at the budget and everything that we have to reduce to make
But
it next
What
year.
the issue is, we know that without this raise, this,
We're gonna
yes,
lose the bus
Yeah,
and then have to pay Orange County to do it.
Yeah. If we don't get competitive, we're going to lose this person and maybe future people that we think might be interested at this new rate, Madeline. And to pay Orange County to do the run, it would be triple the cost. So overall, this is a thing that is very good for the district financially.
All right, any other questions or concerns? All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays, abstentions. All right, moving on to the personnel items. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, hereby approves the items of the personnel consent agenda as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. All right, very quickly.
Brief discussion, Brian Brooding has served this district for over 15 years and served it exceptionally well. He does maintenance as well as transportation. He also has, recently, received a lead stipend for overseeing and has helped us tremendously with that. We'll make a big fuss over him in June because this is a retirement, and we invite all our retirees to that end of the year celebration. But we thank him for his service, and we're happy for him with his decision to retire, and we wish him well.
All right, any questions, comments? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays, abstentions. Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Public comment is intended for members of the community to speak openly and voice concerns in accordance with Policy 1510 of the Garrison Union Free School District. Any person wishing to speak shall comply with all provisions of this policy. Comments about specific school personnel or any persons wishing to speak shall is a violation of board policy. Concerns regarding students or personnel should be discussed privately with the superintendent or appropriate administrator. Comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and speakers are asked to conduct themselves in a respectful manner. The board will listen to comments but will not engage in dialogue. Any necessary follow-up will be noted and provided through the appropriate channel. Members of the public wishing to comment during board meetings are asked to place their name down on this list. All right, we don't have anyone on this list, so unless anyone wants to come forward. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Brings me to executive session.
Their board comment?
I do not have board comment on this agenda as it was a forum, and
Because I have an important comment to make, which I'll make very shortly. Is it all right? Can I?
we add board comment? Dusty, you don't object, do you? Okay, go for it.
So, but the comment is that if anybody's like really, really sick of like, short-term thinking and inflation and climate change, and you would like to enter a world where there's a bright golden haze on the meadow, I would recommend that you check out Haldane's Oklahoma.
What nights is Maya? Is
Self-interested.
it? Just go ahead and tell us what nights Maya is.
Friday, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
I really think you should check it out. Yeah, all the sessions for the ensemble cast as well.
Strong recommendation. We're going to. Seeing as we opened up board member comment, does anyone else have any other comments? I'll just offer up, excited to see Oklahoma, that also I went to the O'Neill meeting last week. I'll do an update. I'm going again tomorrow night. I'll give an update on the 25th. Tomorrow I'm going to go, I don't know if anyone else on our board signed up for it, but Westput's doing an education law seminar. It looks really interesting. So I'll report back on that too. It'll talk about like First Amendment rights, changes in education law.
I just want to thank Dusty for digging through the records of the school. And might go into private investigation at some point.
Yeah. All right. Okay, now I'm going to move on from board member comment to executive session. There's no further board comments. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby enters into executive session for the purpose of discussing the superintendent evaluation. May I have a motion, please? All in favor, please. I promise to keep it brief. So, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Yes. Where can we go? We're going to go.